session, which is for two departments. We have two departments here. We have Department of Business Management, and we also have Department of Industrial Psychology. So we have some colleagues from the Department of Business Management as well as Department of Industrial Psychology. Also, we have our master's and PhD students from the two departments who are also gracing today's occasion. It's important for us to have an orientation program, which is why as a department, we've decided to say, let us, have an orientation program with our master's and PhD students. I am Professor Oni, and I'm also going to now welcome HOD for Business Management, Prof. Shia Murindi, to also do a welcome as well. Prof. Shia Murindi.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning, colleagues and students, and welcome to this postgraduate orientation session program that we're going to have. I'm excited to be part of this program because of the synergies and the linkages that exist between the two departments in terms of certain topics and themes that are within these departments. So it's wonderful to see that instead of the two departments having separate workshops, they have decided to come together to have one workshop and hopefully assist the students in the process of improving not just their research projects, but also becoming better researchers. What I also do is I also, as a staff member, I also have got a notebook where I keep notes of some of the things that I'm looking forward to learn from some of my colleagues that are here. So we hope that everybody will feel welcomed and whatever deliberations that will happen here will happen in the spirit of trying to assist not just staff members, but also importantly our students to be better researchers, to complete their qualifications, obviously, and that's important, and also to produce stuff that output that is not only relevant in terms of its implications to the disciplines, but also policymakers. And that's a thing that's also missing nowadays, this evidence-based practitioner type of information base, which we as academics need to also occupy that hat and to fill. So I hope everybody is welcomed, and I'm looking forward also to the colloquium and all its deliberations. I also want to appreciate Dr. Towns, who has been doing some marvelous background work with the administrators of the departments in allowing us to have this platform that we can have this workshop. And I really hope in future we will have more workshops on certain themes and related topics to also help the work that we do. Thank you very much, and hoping for a fruitful day for everybody. Thanks, Prof.
Thank you, Prof. Shia Murindi, for your opening and welcome. I'm going to move straight into item 2, which is initial aspects, which is what I'm going to talk about. First of all, we need to know, before supervisors engage students, master's and PhD students in terms of supervision, it is important to have a contract. It is important to have a contract. I know in Department of Business Management, we do have a contract, and also in the Department of Industrial Psychology, we have a contract. And this contract needs to be read carefully, by all PhDs and master's students, and signed by the students as well as the supervisors before engaging with the student. So the most important aspect is to know before we as supervisors engage with students, the students need to sign this contract. Now, sometimes we may find out that we do not have a contract with our students. We can still do it even now if we don't have. It's not a problem. But it is important to note as we move forward, because we are still growing and developing, as scholars and also as students, we need to note, we need to have a contract because this contract is very important. There are so many, issues later on which can unfold between students and supervisors. But we are always looking for the positive, positive aspects, in terms of relationship between students and supervisors. So if we do have colleagues who do not have a contract with your master's or PhD students, please make sure you finalize your contracts with your master's and PhD students. Okay, it's very important, and we hope we will all, be complying in terms of this contract. The next aspect I would like to talk about is to talk about some important, rules which you find some of our masters and PhD students are not aware of. I'm going to start with your duration of study. Okay, let me go into masters. If you are doing masters full time, your minimum number of years you can use is 1 year, and your maximum number of years you can use is 3 years. If you are doing your masters on a part-time basis, in terms of your duration, your minimum number of years you can use to complete is 2 years, and your maximum number of duration you can use is 4 years. Okay, that's in terms of duration for masters, full-time and part-time basis. I will now move to our doctoral students. If you are doing PhD, full-time, minimum number of years you can use before you complete is 2 years, and maximum number of years you can use is 4 years. And if you are doing a PhD, which is on a part-time basis, minimum number of years you can use to complete is 3 years, and maximum number of years you can use to complete is 5 years. Now, if you maybe for some situations or circumstances, you do not complete based on the maximum number of years in terms of the G rules, which is responsible for duration, then we normally have the exclusion committee, which is a committee which will look, into the progress of all our master's and PhD students to make sure you do not exceed the maximum number of years which you are supposed to use for your study. If you've exceeded, then you can be excluded. So it's important for you to especially look at your maximum number of years which you have for your study. So my word of advice to you today as master's and PhD students, please make sure you try not to exceed your maximum number of years you have to use to complete your study, be it on a part-time or full-time basis. I'm now going to move from duration. I'm going to go into what we call progression. Progression, as a student, when you get registered for your master's and PhD, you are supposed to present a proposal, all right? Now your proposal needs to be presented first at the departmental level, and then later on at, SBE and FRHDC. SBE will be for if you are doing masters, which is SRHDC, School Research Higher Degrees Committee, or FRHDC, which is Faculty Research Higher Degrees Committee, if you are doing PhD. So now, in your first six months, the first 6 months, if you are doing either you are doing master's or PhD, and if you are full-time, you need to present it. You need to present it if you are doing full-time. But if you are doing part-time in your first year, if you're in your first year, which means in 12 months. So full-time, first 6 months, you have to present your research proposal, at least at the departmental level. Okay? At least at the departmental level to show some progress. So it's important that we look at this in terms of the progression rule. So full-time, we expect you to present within the first 6 months of your registration, either you are a master's or PhD student. And if you are part-time, we expect you to present in the first year, which is 12 months. Okay. So that's in terms of progressions. Now, what if you fail to present? What if you fail to present? We've also got the G rules 1.5.2, which deals with this in the general calendar. If you fail to present as a master's or PhD student, you can be excluded. You can be excluded. It means the department and the faculty can decide to exclude you because you failed to present your proposal. Okay, so my advice to you again is to say, work with your supervisors and try to make sure you present your proposal within the first 6 months if you are a full-time master's or PhD student, and within the first 1 year if you are doing it on a part-time basis. The next part, which I'm going to talk about, is, let's say now you've presented your proposal. If it's master's, yes, you first start, you present at the departmental colloquium. If it's approved, then it goes to SVE or SRHDC. And then if it's approved, then you need to apply for ethical clearance. If you are doing PhD, first you present at the departmental colloquium. If it's approved, then it goes to FRHDC. If it's also approved at FRHDC, immediately it's approved at FRHDC, your next step will be to apply for ethical clearance, which is important. So it means you cannot apply for ethical clearance if your proposal is not approved by the relevant internal structures of the university. First is at the department, and then later on at the faculty. So it is important for you to also take note of this. Now let's go into conducting your research. Before you can conduct your research, you need to have obtained an ethical clearance certificate. Before you can conduct it, you need to have it. Okay? It's in terms of rules which also needs to be followed. So you cannot go and collect data. For example, you can't collect data, even secondary data. You cannot just go and do it if you don't have ethical clearance certificate. Be it primary data, be it secondary. We know secondary is already available for us. You know, for example, if you're doing secondary data, for example, you're using, let's say, World Bank indicator, and then you simply go and then you extract the data and then you analyze. It's not in line with the UFH rule. So be it secondary, you need to obtain ethical clearance certificate. Be it primary data, if you need to go to the fields and collect, you still need to obtain ethical clearance certificate, which is very important for you to note. Okay, please take this also seriously, because what happens is sometimes you find certificates being withdrawn because the processes were not followed. So it's important, you know, you don't want to waste your time and your effort, you know, doing a lot of work and all ready, and then later on you are told you collected your data without, you know, the ethical clearance certificate. So it's important. Then you may now fail to graduate. Okay. So let's try to make sure, you know, we follow the university, you know, rules in conducting our research. It will really help us as we move on. Next aspect I'm going to talk about is progress report. progress report. A progress report is important, which means a progress report is expected on a quarterly basis, you know, and this progress report should be reporting about what progress you've made as a student, as a master's or PhD student. So your progress reports should be, you know, written by your supervisor to indicate or mention, to say, in this first quarter, this is the progress you've made. All right. And your progress report normally will need to be submitted also to our faculty to indicate progress which is made by all masters and PhD students. Now, also, if the department and the faculty is seeing that a particular master's or PhD student is not making progress, it's important also for us to communicate, you know, with the student, which we know we expected the supervisor to be, you know, communicating regularly with the student to track some progress. Sometimes we know we do have problems with emails, and there are so many, you know, issues which can hinder, you know, good communication between masters and PhD students. But it is important to keep this communication going on a regular basis. So progress report is important, and what we should strive for is to have a good progress report which will show we are progressing, you know, as masters and PhD students. I'm now going to round up with one aspect which is also important, which you need to note, which is annual registration. Annual registration. Because you registered in 2022, does not mean in 2023 you are not going to register. Now, it is a requirement in terms of our university general rules for all students, including masters and PhD students, to do an annual registration. It means every year you have to register. Every year you have to register. As long as you are a master's, you're masters or PhD students, you have to register. Only time you do not register is when you have graduated, when you've completed. But as long as you are a master's student or PhD student, you have to register. So there is an annual registration which needs to be done. Also, if you recall, I talked about progress reports. Registering as a master's or PhD student is also not automatic. Let's say you did not make progress for an entire year. You didn't submit a proposal. Your proposal was not approved by any internal structures of the university. And then you want to come in next the following year to register. it becomes a problem because the department and the faculty can say, you register for 1 full year, you haven't made any progress. Can you give us a motivation, submit a motivation why we should allow you to re-register or to register for 2023, which is where the issue becomes, you know, a bit of a problem. If one, you do not have a contract which is signed with your supervisor, if you do not have a progress report which is reported, you know, on a quarterly basis, so one will be able to track if you are actually having problems earlier on, and then one will be able to find a solution in the department to, you know, salvage the situation. So annual registration is not automatic. It doesn't mean that it's automatic. If you've not made the progress, the department will have to review your case based on the motivation you've written to say, let's say, for example, there are so many reasons, maybe you were sick or things like that. Then the department will say, okay, we understand. Then we can allow you to now register in 2023. All right, colleagues and students, those were, you know, the key areas which I feel, you know, are relevant for our master's and PhD students as our, you know, as our students move on and navigate in the right direction to become, you know, doctors, and also some to become masters. So I wish you well in this journey. And I know you need to, for you to progress, communicate, and communicate with your supervisor as many times as possible. I wish you all the best with your studies. I thank you for also giving me the opportunity to explain to you this aspect. I'm now going to move on. What will we do with the questions? Maybe we can deal with questions, or we can have a session for question and answer, which we integrate together. Some of you might be having some questions. We can take questions. Maybe after each speaker, we take a question. So when it's still fresh, please ask questions.
Prof. Tony Morendi has his hand up. I know you can't see, so
I can't see. Yes.
Yes. So.
All right. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Prof, for that presentation. I think it's nice we ask the questions after each session. So yes. I think my input to your session is to thank you for the stuff you've raised, and to also mention that the ethical clearance also expires. And what that simply means is that if you get issued your ethical clearance today, you don't do your data collection, it's only valid for a year. So after every year, you need to go to the IFREC committee and get your ethical clearance also renewed. So this is just to mention that that part, as a member who sits on IFREC as well, we as part of the compliance of our renewal of our license to issue ethical clearances, we must also emphasize, and students must be aware, that there is an expiry to the ethical clearance, and they must make sure that they are aware of this as they do their research. Thanks, Prof.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Marindi. Dr. Towns, you said someone was raising.
Yes, there's also Zinzi. She has her hands up.
Okay. Please proceed, Zinzi.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Zinzi. I'm a student in the department. I registered in 2020. Thank you so much, Prof, for clarifying some of the things that I'm hearing this morning. The information is quite new to me. The orientation is quite helpful. I just have a question concerning Turnitin because I just want to come in a part where we're talking about presenting at FHDC. And then I just want to know for Turnitin, what are the rules? Because in some instances, when you submit a document on Turnitin, the cover page, the table of contents is not normally included. And then even the references are not normally included. Can you just give some clarity on that? Thank you.
All right, with the Turnitin, what happens is we expect a similarity index which is not over 20%, and your individual components should not be above 1%. It means the individual component which constitute your total, when you check your Turnitin report at the back of the Turnitin report, those individual components should not be above 1%. Now, let me go to your issue of references. Those ones can be excluded, all right? Table, I mean, also your cover page, table of contents, those ones can also be excluded. It shouldn't be a problem. What we can do in that regard is if it's making your similarity index to be, you know, above 20%, and you feel it's because of the cover page, we can exclude the cover page and just run it from your introduction to your references. The references is already excluded automatically by the system, where we can identify to say the exclusion of the references. I hope I've answered your question, Zinzi.
Yes, thanks, Prof.
Okay. So all you need to do, Zinzi, is if you can communicate in that regard. So then we can exclude your cover page and table of contents when we submit for FRHDC. It's not a problem. Questions?
Notice Sipo. Sorry, I'm not sure if I've got that right. There's another hand. You're putting your hand down.
Who is coming, Dr. Towns? Is it Nosipo? I can't see. I only see this program.
It's Ma'am Gaza.
Oh, Mrs. Gaza. Mrs. Gaza, please proceed. Dr. Towns, please check for me.
Yes. She's not responding, so perhaps we can go to the third person. Oh, yeah, she's taken her hand down. Cindy, if you can just take your hand down, please. And then there is another hand if you'd like to go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Prof.
Yeah.
Is Penati Fihla?
Oh, Sipinati, how are you?
I'm good, Prof. Thanks, and how are you?
Also good, yes. Please proceed.
Okay, yes, Prof. I would like to ask, Prof. Let's say you are doing masters by this year, which is 2022, and you finish your thesis by or the last chapter by December this year, and your work is going to be sent to the examiners. Then you are waiting for the feedback from the examiners. So up until January. So do you have to register by January, or you will have to wait for the response?
Okay. If it's already sent to your external examiner, you said in December.
Yes.
Let's say you send it in December 2022. Then you're asking
Yes.
if you need to register in 2023. Am I correct? Is that what
Yes,
you're
Prof.
asking? You do not need
Yes, Prof.
to register. In such a situation, you do not need to register because your work was already completed and sent to external examiner. Okay, even sometimes we get information from the deputy registrar, Dr. Rose Marsha, to say you are even covered up to January, all right, for the following year. But sometimes it changes. So I wouldn't want to make it confirmatory. But if it's by December, definitely you do not need to register for 2023, provided it's already submitted to external examiner. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof.
Okay.
That seems to be all the hands at this stage.
My hand is up, Doc.
Okay. Go ahead then.
Okay. Good morning, Prof.
Good morning, Mrs. Gaza. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much, Prof.
Okay.
I was just gonna add to Zinzi on Turnitin issue. I've noted something this year on the plagiarism problem. I just wanted to ask you to give out a tip maybe to the students concerning the white quotation marks.
Oh, okay.
There would be a situation. Okay, Prof. There would be a situation where you get you receive work from an honor student, for instance, and then the percentage is about 60. And then you send it back, you give them advice and all that stuff. But then when it comes back within a day, it is 3%. Then you're asking what happened. And then when I checked, I realized there were white quotation marks. When I asked the student, she was crying and saying she saw this on YouTube. It was like an advice given from YouTube. So I was surprised to hear that. And I'm thinking maybe the students will need to be given something, how to go about doing these things. Thank you so much, Prof.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mrs. Gaza. This is a very serious offense, which is being committed. It's like trying to bypass the university system, making use of the white quotation marks. Because when you look at the documents, you may not see the white quotation marks, except you look at it, deeply. Now, when you use white quotation marks, you are you as a student is now trying to bypass the system. And the university takes this as a very serious offense. Students can be suspended, for such acts. So it's important to take this very, very serious. So as master's and PhD students, my advice to you is not to try to use any way to try to bypass, your similarity index. Because if it's discovered later, we have a committee in the faculty which deals with plagiarism cases. And also, there is also a committee at the Senate which deals with it. So we've got students which can be told, okay, because you've done this, you need to stay away for 1 year and then come back again, depending on the gravity of your case. So my advice is to say, be clean, just do what you need to do as a student. Do not try to bypass the system and avoid using white quotation marks, because it will be seen as a way of bypassing, our system, which we use to check plagiarism. So, Mrs. Gaza, thank you for bringing this to our attention. And I know with this group of masters and PhDs, which we have, we do have quality students who are not going to use white quotation marks.
Yes. Thank you so much, Prof.
Thanks a lot. Yes, it's really important, because we, for example, we do have some cases, especially at the honors level. Yes. Dr. Towns, please check for me.
Yes, Prof, that does seem to be all the hands. If you do have a question on this section, please let us know. Otherwise, I think we can move on, Prof.
If we can move on. Okay, Dr. Towns, it's now, you are now next on our program.
Yeah.
And I'm going to hand over to Dr. Towns, who is going to take you item 3, which is academic writing. Over to you, Dr. Towns. Should I stop sharing, or you just want to talk? Which one? I'm not sure.
Please, Prof, if you can stop sharing, that would be great.
Okay.
There we go. Right, good morning, colleagues, and morning, students. At the risk of my very red nose, there's a reason for me projecting that should become clear just now. So my job is to talk about academic writing. I'm going to be covering just general formatting and layouts type issues, as well as then the referencing. I want to state up front, this is something that we could talk about for a couple of hours. So I'm really going to give it very broad brushstrokes. My intent is more to drive home a particular point of view on academic writing. And hopefully I'm going to get that across. And then all the detail, I'm going to send the slides through to you after this session. And obviously you'll have the recording, so you'll be able to pause and you can have a look at the detail in the slides. But there's no way I can go through all the detail. I'm just more wanting to make a broad statement. So I'm going to hopefully get that across. I'm going to share now my slides that, as I say, I'm going to send through to you. And you can have a look at those. Hopefully those are now being shared. Is that correct? You're seeing my academic writing slide?
Yes, Dr. Towns, it's
Right.
visible.
Good.
We can see it.
Thanks, Prav.
Okay.
Okay, so students, would it be okay if your lecturer, me, let's say, were to come to a lecture looking like this? Hence why I projected myself, just to make sure, you know, with now on Teams and us doing all these online things, you never know what we're wearing. We all could be wearing still our pajamas. So I wanted to make that clear that I wasn't actually wearing my pajamas. Would it be okay? Or, you know, could we have a meeting where I was kind of dressed like that? And if you say yes, then okay, we all will need to have a conversation separately. But if not, if you don't think that would be okay, why not? And then perhaps I can put it a slightly different way. Would you buy this car? Would you drive around in it? I mean, I suppose it's better than nothing, but you know, not that one. Yeah. Or would you rather have something like that? So I'm pretty convinced that I know the answers. You probably wouldn't want me to be dressed in a particular way, and you more than likely would prefer these cars than the previous ones. And yeah, it stands to reason. But then can I ask why you would submit potentially something academic writing that to us that looks like this? Yeah. Okay. There we see no referencing, no acknowledgement of any sources. So my main point I want to drive home is academic writing can be perceived as challenging. It can be difficult, and yes, I think for all of us it is. It's not a comfort place. Maybe for some of the profs it is, but it is something that takes effort. It takes a little bit of concentration. It takes a little bit of putting your best foot forward. And so it's pretty much like those cars, you know. Why provide less than the best, than what you really can put forward? We're not asking for world-class kind of writing. If you can do that, that's fantastic. I think all of us as lecturers, as supervisors, appreciate that academic writing is difficult. We do it ourselves. And so we also understand those challenges. But there are a couple of things that you can do to make it easier for yourself, and hence to make it easier and a more comfortable ride for your supervisors, and at the end of the day, to get a better mark from your external examiner, because that's really where it's all going. And then one of those is very simple. it's to check your work. It's to do a little bit of proofreading. It's to do your own looking at it and saying, is what I've written down what I actually wanted to say? Or have I missed out a word? So to actually read it out loud. I'm sure you've all, from first year, we introduced this concept of checking and writing. It does help. It really, really does. It's not there to make life harder for you, but it's there for you to refine your writing and to enjoy the journey of writing. Another issue I wanted to make quite clear, and I was asked to do this by a number of the actual supervisors too, is what is the role of your supervisor? And your supervisor is there to give you feedback on the content of what you've written. It is not your supervisor's responsibility to provide corrections on your academic writing. So I think that's important just to state that up front. The academic writing component of your dissertation or your thesis is your responsibility and not your supervisors. Your supervisor is there to help you with the content and are you on the right track and to assist you and to guide you in terms of other aspects. So the academic writing really does fall quite solidly on your lap, and there are lots of tools that can help you. So hopefully we're gonna work through some of those. These are some of the common errors that as supervisors, and myself, that we get exposed to, and makes it really difficult for us to do our jobs in terms of guiding you on the content. So you can understand that if I have a terrible cold and I can't talk, it's going to be very hard for my students to understand me in a lecture. I'm constantly blowing my nose and I'm coughing and spluttering all over. It's very difficult to understand what is actually being said, no matter how hard I try. And it's the same idea, the same thought is when the written work that we are presented with sometimes is so difficult to read and to comprehend, it's very hard for us to move from that and have a look at it from a content point of view. So if I can't understand or I can't make sense of what is written, how do I guide the student as to how to improve it from a content point of view? So I think that is really a great way for you to help yourself so that you can help your supervisor to give you their best and to guide you as well as they possibly can. So I'm just going to show you some other examples of some work, and I just want you to cast your eye on it and yeah, put on your academic hat, put on your lecturer hat. I'm sure a couple of you, or maybe all of you, have aspirations to be one. So have a look and see what you think. Two very different looking pieces of work, and we can see that the one at the bottom would be regarded, I'm not talking from a content point of view, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but would be regarded as a better formatted piece of writing than the top one. Okay, and why is that? Okay, so these issues that I'm putting out now are really mostly mine and my preferences. So I know they're shared with a couple, but it might not be shared by everybody. I know, for example, some supervisors across the two departments, and I know even some external examiners prefer Times New Roman. So please check with your supervisor what they particularly prefer if it's not this, and then stick to those and make sure your work is consistently done in that format. And I'm sure you're going to find that life is going to go better for your supervisor and probably then better for you, and your feedback will be a lot more constructive. So stick to a certain font, stick to a particular size, and make sure your line spacing is consistent, and make sure that normally that it is full justification, so it's spread right across the page. As soon as you get into that habit of doing that and checking, the really the better your work is going to start looking. And it's going to look a lot more professional. It's going to look like those nice sports cars, and everyone then is going to want to read your work and to be part of it. So this I'm going to just skim through, and you can just pause and consider it if you want to, but try not to use abbreviations of that size, of that sort. Make sure you're using S's and not American language. Be careful of your bias in your language. So rather than his or her, we use their, and age bias too. Just be aware of that. Numbers 1 to 10 are written out, and if they are bigger than 10, then you can actually use the numbers. That's just a standard rule, and you can see why. Okay, so to start a sentence with numbers is also not going to be a good idea. So 99 people, it just looks very messy. 15% also starting numbers in a sentence also looks very, very messy. It's better to write it out then, as in number 3. Okay, number 4, there's inconsistency. So bear that in mind, and just once again, it's just getting into the habit of it. It just pumps up your academic writing. It's so easy, and it can start to look very professional very quickly. Use full stops in numbers, not commas. And then another issue that was raised in terms of academic writing was the language that is often used by students. And just to make it quite clear, it is hard work, but it's really just a little bit of effort. But it's not meant to be as troublesome as perhaps some students, I think, believe. So I was told this many years ago by Prof. Elliott. I don't know if he's here, but I was doing my master's, and I was struggling because the feedback that I got from my supervisor didn't make sense to me. So I went across and I spoke to him, and he was very kind and said to me, Juliet, you mustn't write to impress. You must write to express yourself. And I've never forgotten that. It's been wonderful advice that's gotten me through. And I just want to impress that on you. The simpler, the better. I think there's a feeling within us when we're doing academic writing that we must use all these fancy Lani words, and that then we're gonna sound a whole lot smarter. But often what happens, and I mean, I'm obviously an English first language speaker, is that we get it wrong, and there's more likelihood of us getting it wrong if we're using language that we aren't used to using. So keep it simple. Use short sentences. If you can say it in one simple sentence, rather do that than saying it in like 5 lines. So look at this first sentence. His deficiency was the reality. It required almost 30 years to. Okay, I'm already lost. And that's one whole sentence. That should be broken down into like 4 or 5 simple sentences. Then we're going to know what's been written and be able to guide the student as to whether they're on the right track from a content point of view. The simple sentences, simpler language is going to win the day. So this is just an example. Once again, selecting the research paradigm is the first step in the research methodology of the study. Simple, to the point, and 100% correct. Defines research paradigm as a way of looking at something. Perfect. Simple, short sentences. Get to the point. Express yourself, and don't get caught up. There are enough fancy languages anyway that you have to talk about, positivistic and interpretivistic. So there's just 3 examples. The third sentence, they all say the same thing. They just say it in more complex ways. Third sentence is to the point, 8 words, and gets to it, and everybody knows what's going on. Another aspect, sounds like I'm contradicting myself here, but avoid cliches. I'm not I quite like user-friendly, but last but not least, okay, few and far between. It's just flowery and a little bit unnecessary. but at the same time, don't use words that are too informal. Okay, so these are some that I've seen myself and so have other student supervisors. There's a lot of something. It's kind of strong. Okay, this is the way we talk, but perhaps these need to be toned down in our academic writing. And, you know, like saying, like, we're going to talk about the stuff, has got, that might be too informal. That's more kind of slang, and that we wouldn't want. So we still want good English in that sense, but not the, let's say, not the Queen's English. Okay. I'm sure you all know about acronyms. Say it out first, write it out first, and then always use it consistently. Please be careful of these abbreviations, often gotten wrong, but if you get it right at the beginning, then you know exactly what to do. And then I really do recommend the use of Grammarly. I use it all the time. I even use it in my emails, and I'm often completely surprised by how much spelling mistakes I make. And Grammarly corrects it for me. So it's free, it's online, you don't have to pay for it, and you just put your work through it, and it actually tells you what you've done that's incorrect. And you just click on this little green button here that's on the right-hand side, and it corrects it for you. And you don't have to take it if you want. So it does call for American spelling, so you can just ignore that. It also corrects your punctuation. So it's really a very handy tool and can take the sweat out of it. All right, so that's just issues. And then in terms of referencing, all right, we use the APA 7th edition. That's the one that's really easily available. If you can get your hands on the 8th edition, that's okay. But the 7th edition is the one that's circulating. It is technical, but it's very monotonous. You know, it's the same thing. It's like making coffee. Once you know how to make coffee, you don't even think about making coffee. You just do it. I'm busy teaching my 5-year-old to make me coffee in the morning, and he finds it challenging. But, you know, within a couple of months, he's going to get it. Thank you, the Lord. And then I can have my coffee. So it just takes a little bit of effort to figure out what does the system require of me. And then once you get it right and know those simple rules, you just plug it in, and it's great. And remember, we've spoken about Turnitin, but it's about acknowledging your sources and who has actually come up with these ideas. So 2 aspects to the referencing, the in-text referencing or citations in your actual academic work itself, and then obviously the reference list at the end. Said that those are the sources that I've used. Also acknowledgement to Northwest University. These slides are also given to me by Mrs. Ford, and she got them from NWU. So acknowledgements there. And then the other 3 sites are very useful to go and have a look, and to, if you're unsure, go and have a look. I particularly like Pluto. All right, so 2 type of in-text referencing, the narrative and the, oh, there we go, see this Lani language, parenthetical, whatever. Okay, if you want that stuff in brackets. All right, so if you are doing it part of the language, then you can use the and, as in AND, and the date is in brackets. But if it's at the end and you're putting it in brackets, then we use that the and symbol. And there's a comma, and then the full stop comes at the end of that. Okay, we use et al. If there are 3 or more authors from the first use of that source. Right, there are 2. You always have the 2 written out in full. You have the 2 authors, but 3 or more authors right from the get-go. First time you use it, you use et al. You use the first author and then et al. It's a new thing with APA. And so just to highlight where the commas and the full stops go, it's very repetitive in that sense. So it's just a rule that we have to follow. Yeah, use et al. From the first, as I said. And And the and the symbol, as I said, if you are using a in-text and you're writing about it and it's part of the sentence, then you put the word and just the date in brackets. It's because you are, it's part and parcel of the sentence you're writing. But if it's at the end, then you use that symbol for and. Right, be aware of when you're using groups or organizations such as the HPCSA or CETA or any kind of governmental acronym, that you write it out in full, you put the abbreviation in, and then you can subsequently use that abbreviation, as with all abbreviations. Then the semicolon, when you are citing more than one source for an idea. So, well, first of all, why would you do that? Because it backs it up. So this sentence, there are different research methods that can be used. If you've got two people who are both agreeing on the same, it's said to be more powerful, okay, because there's agreement there. And you may want to also list people when you are talking about studies have been done in the use of paper in the hospitality industry. This has been used by these 5 people. Then you would list it, and then you would use a semicolon to drive your point that, but they haven't been used in the construction industry. So then it would lend power to what you are stating, and then you would use the semicolon. So now what happens in terms of alphabetical is it's the first author would be obviously at the top of the alphabet, and then it would get lower down. So that's also in alphabetical order, not in date order, in alphabetical order of the first author. So that's why B is in front of C here. Right, and then the reference list part is obviously the one that comes, the acknowledgement right at the end of your document must be on a separate page, and it is in alphabetical order. APA requires also a hanging indent, so the first sentence is right against the margin, and then it's hanging indent from there. Right, so once again, you have your author, date, title, and source. Okay. So here would be an example, and just shows you what that hanging indent looks like. All right, so if it's a journal article, it just requires that rule to be followed, that's the order of what it looks like. Just note that there's one space between the initials, that there is a comma before the and symbol. There's a space between the last initial and the date of publication, and then there's another full stop. The title of the article, so the title, yeah, and then you would have the name of the journal in italics. Volume number, no space, the issue number, if that's available, comma, and page numbers. And if you look at the bottom here, the in dash, so there's no spaces between that dash. Those are put together. And then what's required is that you have the DOI in the form of a URL, okay, with no full stop at the end. Okay, if it's an online source, but it's not from a journal, then you would follow the same rules, but you would have the website name, okay, and it's the same as the author, and you no longer in this version need to have that phrase retrieve from. You basically just put the URL in that format. Okay, and it's no longer needing the month and the date, just the year. Okay, books, that's just to show you if there's an addition, how you would do that. highlighting the comma before the and symbol. Okay, so 2 authors are always written out or more. When it comes to 20 or more than 20 authors, you've listed as more than 20, and then you list the dot and the last author. Different publications that would go according to the year in the reference list. So from the oldest would be first. And then if they have the same date, then you may use the A and the B. And just remember to also in your in-text citation, use the A and the B. This is just how to reference a particular chapter that's inside of a book. Indicated. But there's the recipe. And this is a chapter in a book as well. And this, if you are referencing other dissertations or theses, I will go back to it. There's a particular recipe there for that. All right, so that's just a snapshot of what is required. Remember to check with your supervisor and to make sure that what they are looking for is what you're applying. Apply it consistently through your writing. Get into the habit right at the beginning, and you're going to find life is going to be good, and you're going to enjoy the journey of doing the research. Doing the writing is one part. The other part is obviously the actual research and doing your finding and seeing what you are going to be finding. Any question?
Thank you, Dr. Towns, for your presentation. We will now go into questions and answer. Yeah, Mr. Gavaza.
Yeah. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Dr. Towns. I just want to ask on clarity on citations. Let's say you have 3 different citations. Do you then, and you want to do in-text reference, do you then arrange them according to the year of publication or according to alphabetical order?
So, Bramwell, is this in-text?
Yes, in-text reference.
You've got three different sources.
Yes, and maybe you are writing a definition and you want to cite all these 3 different citations to that definition. Do you then arrange them according to the year of publication or according to alphabetical order?
Alphabetical order, Bramwell. So let's say you are citing, you're citing yourself, you're citing Prof. Oni, and you're citing me. Then Gavaza would be first, then Oni, and then Towns, in that order.
Thank you.
Regardless of if mine is the most recent. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
More questions? We're waiting for more questions. This is a very important aspect for you. Okay. Darlington, Mr. Shigori. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Mine is just an addition I have noticed mostly in academic writing. You realize sometimes when someone is supporting something, they give an author who is from 2019. Then the next author is from 2011. So there is misconception of support using an earlier reference instead of you support an earlier reference, not a newer reference. you support, for instance, you need to use an old reference to support a new reference, not a new reference to support an old reference. So that is a conception I have realized and noticed most often when supporting concepts or ideas.
Okay. Thanks, Darlington. I think that you've also raised an important issue just in terms of currency of the sources that we're using. Once again, check this with your supervisor, and it does depend on what you are writing about. But the general guideline would be not older than 10 years, unless you are writing about underpinning theory. That was written in the the 1920s, then you do need to go back and have a look at that original source. But mostly we were saying if you are looking at empirical work, you shouldn't be looking at writing too much older than that. But Prof, maybe you can support me with that. Prof,
yes, absolutely. For masters and PhD, we talk, if we look at the dissertation or thesis, we're looking at 10-year timeline. But if we are looking at articles lately, you see we start looking at 5 years. Yeah, some articles, some journal articles are becoming very, very strict lately, and they will return your work to say, give us at least a, the recent source is not older than 5 years. But for the PhD thesis or master's dissertation, at least we're accepting 10 years in terms of the timeline.
And that's going to come out in all the committees that you go through, whether it's departmental or FRHDC, etc. That's just one of the issues that is always raised. So yeah.
Yes. And you've also pointed out a very important aspect when you're looking at your theoretical review. Here you can use old references because here you need to cite the origin of the theory, which may be in the even 1920s. Those ones are acceptable for your theoretical review of literature. But for your, when you write your section for your introduction, it shouldn't be older than 10 years. Even in your significance, how do you justify it's significant? If significance, I normally like to see maybe 5 years actually for significance. And then for your conceptual review, it's fine if you're still not getting over 10 years. And then for empirical review, also not over 10 years. Theoretical review, yes, it can be old because you need to, talk about origin of the theories and assumptions, aspects which support your study. Yes, we've got Ms. Gwimba. Proceed with your question.
Okay, good morning, Prof. Good morning, everyone. Please, I just want you to give a clarity. There's something I missed. I want you to clarify me on how a reference should appear, especially when you're referencing a book. How should it appear in the reference list? And also, if you're referencing a chapter in a book, how should it appear in the reference list? Thank you.
Okay. So I will just need to share that again then. And so you said a book.
Yes, I said a book. I said a book using the 7th edition of the APA style.
Okay, so there, I think it is projecting. It's in red, so that would be in your reference list, how it would look.
Yes.
Okay, so you've got your various authors. and the year in brackets, and then the title of the book in italics. If it's an edition, you know, then you would have that. The interesting part now with the APA 7th edition is that you don't have to put the place of publication. Sorry, I don't think I highlighted that. You just need to put the publisher, which is fantastic because I used to scrounge around like a lunatic. So yeah, you just got to say Oxford University Press or Juta or whatever the case may be. Those are articles as well. Let's go back this way. See if there's some other. And so you also asked about a chapter. So this would be a chapter in the reference list. So it's the chapter author and the name of the chapter, and then in, and the bigger book and who the author of that, the title, and then the page numbers, and then the publisher. And then obviously in the in text, it would be the author. I don't know if you want me to go back to that. Is that okay? Have we addressed your question? So. Otherwise, you know, if there is any questions that arise after, you can just email me, and we can chat about it. I'm also going to send you a brief, it's a 2 or 3 page summary of what APA 7th edition requires, and it gives you in-text and reference list, you know, side by side, which is quite handy. I use that all the time as my guide. I'll forward that to everyone as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Towns. Do we still have questions for Dr. Towns? I can see Dr. Mthembu is ready to move in. Do we have questions for Dr. Towns? No more questions. Thank you, Dr. Towns, for your presentation. It's, you know, really assisted, you know, all of us, and
Well, I look forward to seeing all those Ferrari car-looking proposals coming through all the committees now. Thanks, guys. Thanks, girls.
Interesting. No, thanks a lot. So we're going to move on now with our next item on our agenda, which is our program. We're looking at proposal writing. We've got Dr. Mthembu and Dr. Makasi. So I saw Dr. Mthembu was already Dr. Makasi. Yeah. Please proceed, Dr. Makasi.
Thank you, Prof. I'm not so sure whether Dr. Mthembu is also in the house. We're going to do a tag team presenting this very important section. So colleagues, thank you so much, and thank you, Prof. Oni, for organizing this session, and thank you, colleagues, for attending. I'm going to focus on the research proposal together with my colleague, Dr. Mthembu, and I am Dr. Makasi. Okay. I think this section covers what I think is perhaps the culmination of everything that we've looked at since morning. And I would like students to take note of what has been discussed already starting from some of the preliminaries which we are supposed to observe. But for me, I want to then talk about the research proposal, and I'm going to prefix my presentation with my own experience from industry. I used to work in a company where my line manager would always ask me to be very innovative. And in doing so, he would ask me to prepare proposals. Now, I want to tell you one thing that I'm sure throughout my 15 years of experience in the industry, I submitted more than 10 proposals to my line manager. And out of these 10 proposals, only 2 proposals were accepted. Now, this is very important in that perhaps you need to know why 8 were rejected. Even if in my heart of hearts, I felt that the 8 that were rejected spoke to something that I really wanted to be implemented in the company. It was basically my failure to support my proposal, my thinking. It was not very clearly defined. In other ways, the line manager did not see any reason why they should put money in the proposal, which was not well packaged. So I think from that particular basis, you can see exactly that at times as students, we have got these nagging ideas, these ideas that are burning inside us, but they are poorly packaged. And it reminds me of those 8 proposals which were rejected by the line manager. So this then brings me to the question of why do we need a proposal in the first place? Perhaps I've already answered this question as a result of my that anecdote that I provided. But one of the most important things that really supports the idea of a research proposal is for us to then be able to explain the importance of the study. In other ways, motivating the study. And also supporting the idea that is the study necessary? These are critical questions, because as you present your proposal, one of the key things that we look at is whether the study is necessary. In other words, why should we bother to listen to you? Because you're going to be given a platform, first at departmental level, and then at faculty level if you're doing PhD, and then also at faculty level if you're doing your master's, and so on and so forth, as Prof. One explained. But the key question then still remains, why should we bother listening to your proposal? I don't want you guys to suffer from the same fate that I suffered, whereby I saw my 8 proposals rejected by my line manager. We need to make sure that we package our ideas in a very clear and concise manner, which allows us to then be given an opportunity to do our studies. And again, one of the most important things why we need to write a convincing proposal is for funding opportunities. As you're writing a proposal, preparing a proposal, sometimes your research is funded. I know of one student who has already received funding, and I'm sure the funders, they also look at the robustness of the proposal. So I just want to say, as you are preparing your proposal, you must be able to understand that at times it can be rejected, at times it is accepted, on the basis of it clearly indicating the value that it is going to bring to the sponsor. And for you as students, the sponsors of your research, those that are interested in seeing your research succeed, are the panelists, the adjudicators. And it's very important for us to look at that. Now, in terms of my presentation today, which I'm also going to do perhaps in under 30 minutes, though this presentation is ordinarily a lecture for the whole day, I want to also leave space for my colleague, Dr. Tembu, perhaps to add a few things. I'm going to look at the introduction and background of the study, just providing some nuggets of wisdom, the statement of the problem, the research objectives, the research questions or hypotheses, significance of the study, your literature review and the research methodology, delimitations, ethical considerations, and I've added a research plan, which I think is very important. Now, in terms of your research proposal, the assumption is that you already have a topic that has been approved, that has been agreed upon by you and the supervisor. And the starting point now is for you to write the introduction, the background of the study. Now, the introduction is a section that should set the context of the research work. It should explain the research problem, and it should also indicate the purpose behind the study. These are critical points. and I'm sure Prof. Oni and other colleagues have already mentioned that, for you to entice the reader, you need to make sure that the introduction and background of the study is supported by current literature. There is no way you can propose a study which is punctuated by citations of 1954 in 2022. This is one thing that will put away your proposal, in fact, in front of the panel. They'll just look at the citations to say, here is a proposal which the student wants to do in 2022, but everything that is being cited here is literature that is coming from 1954. There is no way this proposal will be accepted. Now, the background of the study, it must also include a review of existing literature on the area of your research leading up to the topic. This is very important because the background of the study must summarize what is currently known about the topic through existing literature and citing very critical studies that are relevant to your study. So there is nothing wrong when you're writing your background of the study to make sure that you identify those literature sources which are current, which are relevant to your study. And I'm talking about the issue of relevance here. There is no justification for you to use citations which are not speaking to your research topic. It is important for you to make sure that there's alignment. In fact, the issue of alignment is going to be our tagline as I'm presenting this session to you. So basically, the background of the study, it must explain how the research will make a significant contribution to the field. And I think this issue of contributing to the board of knowledge is very important, particularly at PhD level and to a lesser extent at master's level. It is about the contribution to the board of knowledge. Now, you need to be able to clearly identify in the background of the study the research gap. What is the gap that you're trying to close? And I've provided for you literature about the 7 types of gaps which are provided for and which is suggested by an author called Miles. I'm sure it is important for you as students. If someone asks you to say, what type of a gap are you trying to close? You'll be able to name this type of a gap by its name. Half the time I see students saying, I'm trying to close this gap. What is the name of that gap? So Miles, through his publication, The Taxonomy of Research Gaps, provides us with the 7 types of gaps. And I think it is important for you to also understand and know exactly the kind of a gap or the type of a gap that you're trying to close. Now, the next step, of course, in this research proposal is to write your statement of the problem. And half the time I've seen students failing to articulate their problem statements. Last week, I was attending a seminar at Wits University for PhD students. And one of the key things that students were struggling with was the articulation of the statement of the problem. Now, the statement of the problem should address the question, what is the problem that the research will address? So you must be able to clearly explain what is the problem the research will address. This particular statement must be very persuasive. And I encourage you to think about writing it in 3 parts. The first part, it explains the ideal situation. And I will explain to you why this is very important to write it in this particular manner. The first part explains the ideal situation. In other ways, we are describing a desired goal, ideal situation, which explains how things should be. The second part should then explain the reality, how things are currently obtaining. And this is now an opportunity for you as a researcher to provide statistics about the nature of the problem and some evidence, because this is the reality that you're trying to explain. Now, as you can see, there's going to be a difference between part A and part B. Part A speaks about the desired goal, things being normal. This is the ideal situation. But part B explains the reality on the ground. And surely there's going to be a difference between the reality and ideal. This difference explains basically the problem that you want to solve. So I want you to then conclude by looking at part C, which speaks about the consequences, to say, because of the difference between ideal and reality, we are seeing these consequences. This is what is happening in the company. This is what is happening in this particular institution. hence the need for the present study. This is what literature says. It doesn't matter how you are going to write a statement of the problem, but what matters to me is your ability to make sure that you clearly state what the problem it is that you want to solve with this particular study. So it is very important, colleagues, to make sure that the statement of the problem is very clear and very clearly defined so that you can move ahead to the next steps. If the statement of the problem is not very clear, it means that all other succeeding steps will not be able to address anything because the problem is not clearly defined. Once you're done with this, the next step is for you to write your research objectives. Now, research objectives represent what the study seeks to achieve. We always write our research objectives by prefixing them with to, and then we follow it by an action word, e.g. to examine, to evaluate, to determine, etc. Now, very important thing is that words have got meaning. These words have got meanings. Examining and evaluating and determining are all different. They have different meanings and they've got different connotations, and their use in the formulation of research objectives must be carefully thought out. And that's why I mentioned here that note the appropriate use of these words depending on the nature of the study. I would not expect you, if you're telling me that you're doing a qualitative study, and then in your objectives, I see evaluating, I see examination. I've never seen an evaluation being done in a qualitative study. So it is very important for you to align. Remember the buzzword. Remember our tagline today. It is about alignment. If your study is qualitative, make sure that you use appropriate action words. You use appropriate action words in formulating your research objectives if your study is quantitative as well. Now, under research objectives, I would want you to think about coming up with two classes of your research objectives. The first one is your primary objective. Now, please don't write primary objectives. It's only one primary objective, which is formulated directly from the research topic. So you do not need to think how to formulate a primary objective. Go back and look at your research topic and then translate your research topic into an objective. That's your primary objective. Now, the secondary objectives are very important in that if we manage to achieve the secondary objectives, all of them, it means the primary objective has been achieved as well. So it means that we need to base our secondary objectives on the constructs which we would have identified from the variables in our study. Now, secondary objectives, again, are stated in the same manner. We always prefix them with to, do X, Y, Z, to examine, to evaluate, to determine. If you want to explore, there is no way you can explore in a quantitative study. So very important thing is that as you are formulating your research objectives, make sure that they speak to your research topic. Otherwise, I just want to say words have got meaning. The meaning of words should never be ignored. The research questions and or hypothesis is the next section that follows after a statement of the problem. I have decided to look at them together. As you can see, there's a difference here between your research questions and hypothesis. So I want you to say, state the research questions, both the primary and secondary questions. Remember, we are trying to align things here in our objectives with the primary objective and the secondary objectives. So similarly, in terms of our research questions, we are supposed to have the primary question and secondary questions as the objective stated earlier on. This is very important, colleagues. This is very important, colleagues, because we're trying to really make sure that there's alignment. Remember what I said earlier on. I said our tagline today, and coming from marketing, I like taglines. I want everyone else to understand that the tagline for today is let there be alignment. So I'm thinking about the issue of research questions, aligning directly to your research objectives. Now use research questions if the study is qualitative, and the hypothesis if the study is quantitative. This is the distinction that I'm trying to provide here to make sure that if your study is qualitative, we usually use research questions. If the study is quantitative, go for hypothesis. Now, similarly, there is also the main hypothesis or the primary hypothesis and also the secondary hypothesis, just like what we've just done for our research questions. So again, I am saying let there be alignment. So I want you guys, make sure that you can forget everything that I'm saying to you today, but don't forget that there is this tagline, let there be alignment. Now the next step, after you've stated your research objectives, you've stated your research questions, now you need to move on to the significance of the study. Now, significance of the study provides you with an opportunity to justify the importance of your work and its impact in the field. Now, in terms of stating the significance of the study, I would want you to look at 3 critical areas: significance to practice, significance to policy, significance to theory, in terms of how this particular study contributes to the body of knowledge. And again, as previously stated by the previous speakers, you need to clearly state it in terms of the use of current references. So significance of the study, I would want you to think about these 3 critical areas: practice, policy, and theory, but again, an opportunity for you to use current references. Now, once you're done with the significance of the study, you can then move on to the literature review section. Now, I've seen so many students writing literature review in any way they want. It's another opportunity for them to regurgitate what authors have written about so many things. And in many cases, the literature review provided here is basically descriptive literature review. You must be able to interrogate the existing literature. In other words, we also need to hear your voice inside this particular review. Otherwise, the whole literature review section becomes a very descriptive way of looking at literature. But basically, the aim of a literature review is to summarize and synthesize the arguments and ideas of existing knowledge. So this is very important. What does literature say? What are the major arguments? Who are the major contributors to arguments in this particular area that I want to research on? These are critical considerations. A very important issue is that you need to look at what is known from literature and what is yet to be known. The difference between what is known and what is yet to be known provides you with an opportunity to then say, I have reviewed literature. This is what is known from literature. And I've also reviewed literature. This is what is yet to be known. You can clearly see that it presents an opportunity for you, then position your study. Say, from the known versus the unknown, my objective is to provide more insights, more information. That's why this research is very important, so that I can close the gap of the unknown section. Now, in writing your literature review section, I want you again to write it in 3 sections. First, start with the theoretical literature review. This is an opportunity for you to state the key theory or theories underpinning your study. And like what Prof. Oni mentioned earlier on, this might be an opportunity for you to go back to 1954 and cite this theory by Leon Festinger, 1957, which talks of consumer behavior. This is the only opportunity you have to go back into time to look at some of these existing theories which speak to your present study. So it's not about just identifying any theory, but it's about identifying a theory that speaks to your present study. There must be alignment. Let there be alignment. The second section, you can look at your conceptual literature review. By conceptual literature review, we're talking about the review of the concepts which make up your study. Now, remember, in your research topic, we have research variables. For example, if you are researching about absorptive capacity, and I'm talking about absorptive capacity here because we are working with Prof. Willie on a study on absorptive capacity. You need to operationalize absorptive capacity. What do you mean by absorptive capacity? What do you mean by brand equity? Remember, brand equity is in our topic. It's a variable. So what you need to do is to operationalize these variables. Once you operationalize the variables, you identify the constructs. And these constructs, you need now to review the constructs in terms of how they relate to literature. So that's your conceptual literature review. The starting point is for you to be able to operationalize the variables. The last section on a literature review is your empirical literature review. Remember, we also want to identify some empirical evidence evidence from existing literature, from existing studies. How do they support our present study? What are the points of deviation from these empirical literatures? Again, under this section, that's where you need to use proper APA 7 citation style. And please make sure that you do scholarly writing. Half the time, we are struggling with work that has not been written well. There are spelling errors. There is no coherence. One paragraph is not speaking to the next paragraph. Now, what I want to mention here is that even if you are writing the research proposals in the sections, it doesn't mean to say that these sections are standalone. One section must lead into the other. The introduction and background must be correctly connected to the next section with the statement of the problem. And also make sure that the statement of the problem connects and fits very well with your research objective. And so on until you are done with the research proposal. My professor used to say to me, imagine you are weaving a basket. If you are weaving a basket, there must be a process of a seamless process of weaving this particular basket. So I think it is very important for you and for colleagues to understand that when writing the research proposal, we are in the process of weaving this particular basket and must do so in a seamless process. Now, I just want to say once again, review relevant literature. There is no way you should look at literature that does not speak to your research objectives. So go back again and make sure that you look at these research objectives and align your literature review to the research objectives. Otherwise, you end up reviewing literature that does not speak to study. The buzzword comes back. Let there be alignment. This is what I want you guys to know. Let there be alignment. The next section, perhaps the most important section, is your research methodology. Now, if you're doing the commercial research and you are submitting your proposal, this is the section that we look at most because it explains exactly whether this study is going to be relevant or not. So the research methodology outlines how the research will unfold. And I always say, write it in future tense. This is a proposal. You're talking about the future, what you're going to do in future. So write the research proposal, particularly this particular section, the research methodology in future tense. My research paradigm will be, my research design will be, you have not yet been given the go-ahead of doing the actual research. So you're simply making a proposal. So these are the sections that are supposed to perhaps to look at, okay? The first section deals with the research paradigm, and you've got a choice of 3 paradigms: positivism for quantitative research, interpretivism for qualitative research, and pragmatism, perhaps, for those who are going to do a mixed research approach. So guys, make sure that you understand what the research paradigm is all about. It is about your philosophy, the way how you interpret things around you, particularly the question concerning reality. Are you looking at reality with multiple meanings or reality with single meanings? If reality is defined by you as having a single meaning, then it means philosophically you come from the positivism world. Interpretivists, they believe that reality cannot be defined by a single meaning. We have got multiple meanings of reality. That's why we need to look at that. So it's about the worldview, the way how you see things around you. It is very important for you to state it clearly. The next section, of course, talks to the research design. So many designs are there. In fact, 3 critical designs. You can choose either descriptive, you can also do exploratory design. Now, again, I'm talking about the issue of alignment here. If my study is qualitative, there is no way I can choose descriptive, okay? Because we are not interested in describing things here. Perhaps if my study is qualitative, I can go exploratory. If my study is quantitative, I can go descriptive, okay? So you can see the idea of alignment is very important throughout the whole of this writing. The research approach, just like the research designs, we identify the 3 designs. In terms of research approach, we can also identify 3 research approaches: quantitative approach, the qualitative approach, your mixed methods approach. I like the alignment, and that's why I say let there be alignment. In terms of data collection methods, now, again, make sure that you align. Interviews, your surveys, your experiments are some of the methods that you can use to collect the data. But remember, you cannot use interviews in a quantitative study. If your study is qualitative, then go along the interviews. If your study is quantitative, you can think of surveys and experiments. This is very important, colleagues, to make sure that there's alignment. And I think it is important that we keep on taking note of this very important observation. Once you're done with the data collection methods, we can then move on to the population of the study. Here you need to be very explicit. State the population of the study and also the size if it is known. There is no need for you to simply say, I'm going to use collected data from SMEs from this particular locality. How many are they? It would be very good for you to then provide the size of the population. The next section, of course, is your sampling and sampling procedure. You've got a choice of probability and non-probability sampling techniques, okay? It's not enough for you to simply say, I'm going to use probability sampling techniques or non-probability sampling techniques. You need to identify the various or the specific probability sampling technique that you're going to use. Remember, probability is just an umbrella of quite a number of sampling techniques that you can use. Similarly, non-probability also, quite a number of them that you can use, from convenience to judgmental. Under probability, you can think of your simple random sampling, your systematic, your cluster sampling techniques, all those, they really fall under them, okay? Now, ideally, if your study is quantitative, think about using probability sampling techniques. If your study is qualitative, think about using the non-probability sampling techniques. Because the objectives of qualitative and quantitative research are different, okay? In quantitative research, you are interested in making sure that whatever we collect, we must be able to generalize it to the entire population. Therefore, in terms of sample size, sample selection, we need to be very scientific. That's why probability sampling techniques are very important in this particular regard. Now, I want to say that whatever choice you make sure that you support. Why are you using positivism as a paradigm in your study? Please get support. Don't just state to say, I'm going to use positivism. Identify, and then you support to make sure that there's credence, there's also support for all these choices. The next section, of course, is data collection instruments, still falling under research methodology. Your instruments here are the instruments that are going to use to collect the data. Now, two very common instruments that we use is the questionnaire and the interview guide. Particularly if you're doing a quantitative study, then you need a questionnaire. The questionnaire can be one that you're going to develop online, and then the interview guide basically is your qualitative research. So again, there's alignment here. If my study is quantitative, I must be thinking of using the questionnaire as an instrument for collecting data. However, there are certain cases where perhaps you're using secondary data. Do you need an instrument for collecting secondary data? I like it when economists look at data that has been collected over the years. You may not need an instrument. So you may need to really clearly specify that in this particular case, I am looking at secondary data, documentary evidence, okay? That's going back into the archives and looking at what things transpired in the past. Validity and reliability, very important issues. But I want you to think about validity and reliability, particularly in terms of your quantitative research. We don't speak of validity and reliability in qualitative research. In qualitative research, we are interested in what is called trustworthiness of the data, okay? How do you ensure trustworthiness in a qualitative study? We talk of data saturation. In other words, you collect data as much as possible until you reach a point where new data or new themes are emerging. And that's exactly what you're supposed to look at. Now, look at trustworthiness in terms of its different forms, particularly when writing this particular section. Again, you are proposing to say, this is exactly what I will do in terms of addressing the issue of validity, addressing the issue of reliability. Many students do not realize that validity and reliability are two different things. So when you're writing, please don't combine. You need to look at validity alone. You need also to look at reliability alone and provide issues concerning how you are going to assess the reliability of your instrument. And I know many of you mentioned the fact that reliability is going to be assessed using Cronbach's alpha. Of course, that's true. Now, the last section is going to speak to data analysis. I would want you, as you're writing your research proposal, to state the expected outputs and the software to be used. I think it is very important. It's not enough for you to simply say, I'm going to use SPSS, or I'm going to use AMOS, or I'm going to use Atlas TI. What specific outputs, what specific analysis are you going to do with SPSS, with AMOS, with Atlas TI, with NVivo, any of these softwares. I think it is very important at this particular stage to make sure that you think of using some softwares to analyze your data. Okay, very important. Again, the buzzword is, let there be what? Can someone tell me? Let there be what? Someone tell me. Let there...
Alignment.
Thank you. Thank you. Let there be alignment. I'm talking about alignment, and I think that's very important. Now, as I come towards the end of my presentation, the next thing, of course, is to talk about the delimitations. Now, delimitations are better known by politicians when they are creating boundaries. Okay, if you discover that in this particular area, perhaps people don't like you, you may ask for a new boundaries to be created. So delimitations are basically your research boundaries. They can be geographic, or they can be in terms of your participants. Now, you need to state it in terms of inclusionary as well as exclusionary delimitations. In other words, I'm saying, who are those participants included in this particular study? And who are those participants who have been excluded in this study? Okay, and justify exclusion and inclusion. Colleagues, this is very important. Make sure that you state this clearly to say, in terms of my delimitations, here are my boundaries. And here is the justification for inclusion and justification for exclusion. The last thing, of course, is about the issue of ethical considerations. Now, ethics are very important. Now, however, many students believe that ethics are supposed to be observed during the process of collecting data. That's not correct. Ethics must be observed before data collection, and that's why we need ethical clearance certificate. Remember, you are applying for the ethical clearance certificate before you have collected it, and it's part of the ethical considerations, okay? So I want you to think about ethical considerations in terms of before data collection, during data collection. Now, during data collection, you can now mention the issue of confidentiality and the POPI Act, which many of you know, okay? These are issues which you consider when you're collecting the data. Now, after data collection, many students and many of us believe that there's nothing to think about in terms of ethical considerations after data has been collected. But the reality is that we need to consider ethical considerations after data collection, particularly the disposal of collected data and other materials. There is no way you as an ethical researcher will end up throwing all these transcripts everywhere, okay, simply because you've passed your degree, you've passed your dissertation, you're done, and now you're throwing all these transcripts everywhere in the streets of East London. There is no justification of that. So we need to think about ethical considerations before data collection, during data collection, and after data collection. So colleagues, I always want students to come up with a research plan. Once you're done, make sure that you come up with a research plan. Now, why do I need a research plan? I want a research plan because it helps the student to remain focused, to remain on course, and also for planning purposes. There is no way this plan is going to be cast in stone. We're going to come back and perhaps change the plan depending on circumstances. But once the student has got an activity plan, it helps for planning purposes. This is very important, colleagues. You may think that it is very important for you to make sure that as you're writing your research proposal, come up with a research plan because it is going to guide you throughout this whole process. Again, as I come to the end of my presentation, I want everyone to say this. Let there be what?
Alignment.
Alignment.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Makasi. Let there be alignment. A very, very good presentation. And I'm going to allow Dr. Mtembu to add, and then after, then we can now take some questions from participants. Dr. Mtembu.
Morning, colleagues, morning, students. Let me upload my very short presentation, which has been made to be very easy by Dr. Makasi here, who has actually presented almost everything. Let me just take some few minutes to try and upload. Colleagues and students, can you see my presentation that side, the table of contents?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you very
Yes.
much. Thank you very much. I will quickly go over the table of not necessarily the table of contents, but what will the student have to present in writing the proposal. But of course, as I've indicated, Dr. Makasi has actually covered almost everything. My job will really be very simple and straightforward. But also, the most important issue that I would like us to take a look at are the research frameworks. I have tried to actually thrill my honor students as well as my master students at Fordham with regard to using the research frameworks to actually get a direction of your proposal and your plan, and going forward, what is it that you will be looking at? What are you going to be working on? But I hardly find any research framework being presented in their proposals. I do not know why is that the case, when actually the research framework will make things to be very simple by having this kind of a visual aid, this framework. You know, I'm doing these are my variables and I am moving from here to here. The importance of the research frameworks. We will visit them at a later stage, but let us go back to the table of contents, the contents of the research proposal. Dr. Makasi has actually done everything, spoke about everything that includes the introduction, that is about the introduction as well as the background of the study. But I will just add a little bit there with regard to the basic approach that could be used by students to introduce their study. But before we get there, the importance of conceptualizing one study. What will be the variables that will have to be included, or what are the variables that I will be including in my proposed study? That is very important. Conceptualizing the actual study. Like Dr. Makasi indicated, I like what he pointed when he actually referred to the organization. Do you have access to the organization before you actually initiate the study, before you start with the proposal? Do you have access to have any connection, to have any link in the organization that you can use to actually get information of what could be the problem in that particular organization? What is it that the organization can really feel very interested if I say, can I please investigate this problem in your organization? If you do have that link in the organization, you are a very lucky person, because you can start trying to find out what are the important variables that you will have to include in your study. First of all, you will be able to identify the primary variable of the study, the variable that you are really, really interested in investigating. And using a particular method or technique called the 5 whys, you can elicit, you can be able to use the technique to get the other variables that you can include in your study, and look as to how do they affect your primary variable? How do they actually impact on your primary variable? So, for example, you have established from the manager that there is low morale there. So you know that your primary variable, the variable that you want to investigate is morale. And then you ask him or her, but why? Maybe you get the answer like, people are not happy, so that is job satisfaction. But why? There is no delegation. But why? It looks like the managers do not trust their employees. But why? They want to control. You have already identified the most important variables that will form your study. Is morale, is delegation, is trust, is control, is leadership. You can actually start conceptualizing your study from that perspective, using the 5 whys to establish the variables that will have to be part of your study or your proposal in this regard, and then work from there. If you are lucky enough to have access to the organization. Secondly, maybe you don't have that access to any person in the organization. Common sense will also be very important in trying to pick up the variables that you want to investigate. So we know if there is low morale, you can look as to, common sense can tell you that it could be because of this variable or this variable or that variable. Of course, hunches are not actually encouraged when it comes to conducting scientific investigations. But believe you me, common sense can always give you the direction as to what variables could be very important in determining this, or in determining this particular problem. Most importantly, preliminary investigation of the theory. Theory will be very important. You have identified the problem that you want to investigate. Go look at the theory, go look at the literature, do that preliminary literature review and look as to what are the most important variables that have been investigated when it comes to this problem. What are the new variables that are there now that could also be affecting this problem, that could be affecting this primary variable? That could be another way of doing it. Preliminary research will be very important in actually conceptualizing your study and identifying the variables that you will have to include in your study. What will be your primary dependent variable? What will be your independent variable or variables? What could be the intervening variables that could be in between your independent variables and your dependent variables? So conceptualization in that regard is very important. In introduction, Dr. Makasi actually said everything about the introduction. But what I would also like to add on top of what Dr. Makasi actually indicated is the identification, is actually the adoption of the funnel approach. The funnel approach in this regard is very important when you are introducing your study. The funnel approach oftentimes starts with a very wide kind of an articulation. Maybe you just look at very widely, at why organizations exist. And then from there, you systematically now come down to linking that with your problem, the problem that is associated with your primary variable or variables, systematically, as Dr. Makasi indicated, looking now at the literature, the primary variable, the problem that is associated with the primary variable, how has it been investigated in the past? And in doing so, that is how you are now systematically introducing the independent variables of your study. By looking at the previous literature, what has been studied in order to solve this specific problem in the past, you also systematically go on to look at the next independent variable, incorporating it by looking at that literature review, which will then culminate in you indicating in that introduction, the background, the literature review, culminating in what is it that you want to investigate. I am not actually trying to contradict what Dr. Makasi indicated, but I'm just trying now to actually provide a very basic blueprint of how can you use the funnel approach to actually incorporate all the elements that Dr. Makasi has actually indicated. For a PhD study, the importance of identifying the gaps exactly as Dr. Makasi indicated, but not so important for honors, not so important for masters, but also important to a certain extent, but not as important as using literature, the previous models in the introduction to identify the gaps for PhD students. That is very important to indicate that your conceptualization of your study is aligned at the correct level, PhD level. You look at the theory, you look at the models, and you identify the gaps. Dr. Makasi, I can't put it more clearer than Dr. Makasi when it comes to the different types of gaps that you can identify for PhD students. Okay, if I can carry on from them, the problem statement, Dr. Makasi said almost everything over there with regard to the problem statement, but I will just add here that it always is of great assistance when you consult the annual reports of the organization, whereby you could be able to identify the problems in that specific organization, and then you can build your problem from there, from identifying that problem in the organization. Maybe it is turnover, maybe it is low productivity, etc., etc. Identify that problem in the annual. It's always very helpful to refer to the annual reports of the organization to identify those problems and try to link that problem or those problems to your primary variable. In doing so, you will have identified the problem that is going to drive your study. That is all that I will have to say about the problem statement. The research objectives, the hypothesis, as well as the research questions, I would like to actually link those with the research frameworks. You have identified your variables, you have conceptualized your study, and so on and so on. Start by developing your research framework, do indicate how your variables are linked to each other. As I have indicated over here, the simplest model is that simple or linear regression model, whereby we've got one independent variable and one dependent variable. The arrow there linking our independent variable, which is job satisfaction, to or with work engagement, that is our hypothesis. In other words, in that simple framework, we are saying job satisfaction has a positive significant effect on work engagement. That is our hypothesis, from which, exactly like Dr. Makasi indicated, we can now derive our objective as well as the research question. I usually like the approach whereby we identify the problem, the ideal, as Dr. Makasi indicated, the ideal condition or situation for the problem statement. And we identify what is actually happening in the organization. And then we look at some theory over there, and then we put the question according to what has been identified. You then ask the questions: could job satisfaction have a significant effect on work engagement? Include your research questions in your problem statement. That is one option, but if you prefer not to do it that way, it is still okay. Okay, I actually have looked at this research framework over here. Let us look at the next one here. This is a multiple regression research framework. As we can see, it has got 3 independent variables and 1 dependent variable. This is purely multiple regression research framework. This is the framework that we oftentimes tend to adopt at our simplest level. No, not at our simplest level, at our honors level. But oftentimes we have only 2 independent variables and 1 dependent variable. The research objectives are right over here. They are very visible. As Dr. Makasi indicated, you want to investigate the effect of job satisfaction on work engagement. That is the objectives. Second one, to investigate the effect of organizational commitment on work engagement. The third one, to investigate the effect of organizational citizenship behavior on work engagement. The hypothesis: I am a quantitative person, if I can put it that way. I hardly focus on qualitative research. Your hypothesis from those objectives will simply be derived. This framework is giving you everything. You've got the research questions, you've got the objectives, you've got the hypothesis. Job satisfaction, that is your hypothesis number 1. Job satisfaction has a positive significant effect on work engagement. The second one, OC, organizational commitment, has a positive significant effect on work engagement. The third one, organizational citizenship behavior, has a positive significant effect on work engagement. Hypothesis from this framework, your objectives from this framework, as well as your research objectives, which you can incorporate in your problem statement, could be easily derived from this framework. Okay, let me leave that and go back to our table of contents. The theoretical literature review, Dr. Makasi covered almost everything here. The theoretical literature review, basically that is literature review. The theoretical literature review, he covered everything there. I cannot add anything. The conceptual literature review, he indicated there the definition of the variables, the dimensions in conceptualizing your variables. That was very loud and clear. What I can add here is on the issue of empirical literature review. Empirical literature review, that is where it is very important for you as a student that you are looking at the relationships between or among your variables. In other words, you go back to your research framework and look at what have you conceptualize to be the relationships between or among your variables. In this simple job satisfaction work engagement model, in your empirical literature review, you will be looking at the relationship between job satisfaction and work engagement. In this second simple model, you will be looking at the relationship between job satisfaction and work engagement. And once we have done that, you will then propose your hypothesis. Secondly, you will look at the relationship between organizational commitment and work engagement, whereupon after that, conceptual argument, theoretical argument, and empirical evidence, exactly like Dr. Makasi indicated, the empirical evidence, you will then propose your hypothesis. And you will also do that with organizational citizenship behavior as well as work engagement. This framework is making things to be very easy for yourself. And then let us go back to our table of contents. Dr. Makasi covered everything when it comes to research methodology, the research philosophy, the research approach, the research design. What I can just highlight when it comes to research design will be the fact, like he indicated, Dr. Makasi, the issue whether your research that you are proposing will be a descriptive research or an exploratory, etc., etc. What you will also have to make sure that you include will be whether your research will be a survey research or whether will be grounded theory, etc., etc. But of course, typically in academia, we do survey researches by use of a questionnaire that will have to come out very clearly in the research design. Also, in your research design, you will have to indicate whether your research that you are proposing will be cross-sectional or will be developmental. Of course, in 99%, 99.9 of the studies in industrial psychology, we conduct cross-sectional researches whereby we collect data at one point in time. You cannot wait for some few years to come back and investigate if this variable has changed or not. We don't have that time in academia, basically. So cross-sectional will have to come there, and whether your research design will be a correlational study or a causal study, that will be very important to mention in your research design. Of course, typically, most of the studies that we conduct in industrial or basically in academia, but let me say in industrial psychology, and business management will be correlational studies, whereby we can look at the relationships among the variables, and we can even make inferences, all those inferences, the effect of job satisfaction on organizational citizenship behavior. We are using correlations to come up with those inferences. We are not doing correlational causal studies. Causal studies could only and only be carried out by experiments. So whatever, whether it's structural equation modeling or whatever, the impact, the regression, that is a correlational study. It will have to be very clear that you mention that. Of course, in some other instances, students or some researchers tend to include the issue of whether the approach, the study is qualitative or quantitative when they are talking about the design. But actually, as Dr. Makasi indicated, that is supposed to be a research approach, whether it is qualitative or quantitative. Most researchers are forgiven in mentioning that when they are talking about the research design. Okay, going down to population and sample, I cannot add anything more than what Dr. Makasi actually shared with us, except that it is very important for you to define those concepts so that the reader knows what is it that you are talking about before you actually mention that the population of the study will be made up of so many. Estimate if you can't find the actual number, etc., etc. But make sure that you define those concepts. You define the population, you define the sample, and so on and so on. Okay, going down to sample size, Rausoft is a very popular tool to actually calculate your sample size once you at least have some information with regard to what your population could be. Do make a reference to that, but it's not the only software that is easily accessible that you can use to estimate your sample size. Rausoft is the most common one. Sampling technique, actually, excuse me, as Dr. Makasi indicated, non-probability and probability. But what usually is the problem is that, of course, probability sampling techniques are the ones that are very ideal. It's very ideal because you can then generalize, etc., from having adopted and used probability sampling techniques like random sampling, simple, not stratified. What is that other one? Systematic sampling, etc. Those are the techniques that can allow you to generalize, but it could be a very big challenge to go to Eskom and say, Eskom, give me the list of all your employees from which I will then choose 315 employees that I would like to interview or to give questionnaires to. That could really be a very big challenge. Hence, in most instances, we are likely to use the non-probability sampling technique of convenience sampling. That, unfortunately, is oftentimes the only technique that is available to us. So it is very important that you are aware that you should indicate that there are these different types of techniques, the probabilities, the non-probabilities, and these could then allow for generalizing the findings, and these, but this is what is going to be adopted for the purposes of the study. Oftentimes, convenience sampling, which will then have to, when you are done with your reporting and everything, you will have to indicate in your limitations that since convenience sampling was used, the results of the study cannot be generalized to the whole population. That is one of the most important obvious limitations that you may have to indicate after having reported everything. Okay, if I can carry on the research instruments, Dr. Makasi also mentioned everything there. When you are reporting your research instruments, it's very important that you indicate who developed the instrument, or at least the source from which you obtained the instrument, and how many dimensions it consists of, and how many items it consists of. The Cronbach alpha reporting the reliability of each instrument is very important. At higher level, at PhD level, is also very important that you indicate the validity of the instruments. Oftentimes at honors level, it's okay. If you just report on reliability, I'm not going to be putting much pressure on the student to report on validity, because just like Dr. Makasi indicated, in some instances, at that level, they are not even aware that there is a difference between the two, between reliability and validity. But at masters, you must be fully aware that the two are different. At least you are expected to report on both the reliability and the validity of the instruments, of each instrument. At PhD, that is you cannot be presenting at PhD level without giving that information. You are at another level now. We are expecting that information from you, that for the instruments, you will be, except if you really couldn't get that validity information, but you should at least try to get that reliability is not negotiable, but validity at PhD, it should be there. Data collection procedures, I won't be saying anything more than what was presented by Dr. Makasi, which to me, everything was indicated over there. Statistical analysis. At honors level, you will definitely conduct the descriptive analysis. You will, at all levels, you will definitely be presenting, you will definitely use SPSS to present the characteristics of the sample. In other words, you will be presenting the descriptives that are actually referred to as frequencies. Frequencies, the number of times the subgroups occur in your sample. You will definitely do that. In most instances, let me say in other universities, the frequencies, the characteristics of the sample, that is usually presented in chapter 5. When you are presenting your sample, that is when you also present your sample characteristics. But I have seen that in other universities, including Fordham, that is presented as part of the results. When you are writing your proposal, do indicate that SPSS will be used to analyze and present the descriptives to describe the characteristics of the sample, and also to indicate the levels or the descriptive statistics or results regarding the variables of the study. You will do present the descriptive results. So that should be very clear that is what you will be doing, as Dr. Makasi indicated. It's not enough to just indicate that SPSS will be used, or Lisrel, or any structural equation modeling will be used, or any structural equation modeling software will be used. But indicate specifically what is it that you will be using for, using that particular software to analyze and present. As I've indicated, at honors, masters, it's a given that you will do the descriptives, both the frequencies for presenting the characteristics of the sample and also the descriptive statistics for presenting the levels of the variables in your sample. Explain that. And also, reliability analysis, you will conduct it at any level, at honors, at masters, at PhD. You will do reliability analysis, which is also referred to as item analysis. You will do item or reliability analysis to investigate or to present the properties, the psychometric property of reliability of your measuring instruments, or in brackets of your variables. You will do that. Present it exactly like that. Also, you will present at honors and masters, you will also present the relationships among or between your variables. The correlations will have to be there. You will have to indicate that. Regression, whereby you are now looking at the extent to which job satisfaction causes a variance on work engagement. You will present that. Going to this second model over here, you will present the correlations among these four variables. Those are the correlations. And you will also present, you will also use regression analysis to investigate if job satisfaction does or does not have a significant positive effect on work engagement. Organizational commitment on work engagement. Organizational citizenship behavior on work engagement. Regression will be used over there to indicate that very clearly in your statistical analysis that that is what you will be doing. Okay, if I can then carry on at PhD level. Structural equation modeling. In other universities, structural equation modeling will start at master's level. You can include all these data analysis techniques that I have referred to, and you also go on to structural equation modeling. At PhD level, I think that is also a requirement at PhD level, whereby you will definitely have to present these frameworks, these models, and then you test them statistically. At PhD level, that is where you could be having such a model, whereby instead of, okay, let's, if we take a look at this model, in this model, okay, if you take a look at this model, it's got two independent variables, and it's got some intervening variables, which is job satisfaction and stress, and it's got two independent variables. So you could come up with lots and lots of presentation looking at the effect of organizational justice on job satisfaction, looking at the effect of organizational justice on stress, looking at the effect of organizational justice on organizational commitment, all those regression analysis for each individual part. But structural equation modeling, you will do this one analysis here simultaneously, whereby you can then be able to substantiate or reject each of these parts here. All these arrows are actually the parts, are actually the hypotheses. You do that analysis using structural equation modeling simultaneously. You don't have to do individual regression analysis for all those relationships from this variable to this variable. You don't do that individually with regression or multiple regression or linear regression. But with structural equation modeling, you do everything all at once simultaneously, and then you will just be looking at the indices that will be given, the output that will be given by the program, for you to then verify if indeed does organizational justice have a significant effect on job satisfaction. Does the work-family conflict have a significant effect on stress? Does stress have a significant effect on organizational commitment? Structural equation modeling at PhD level, preferable starting from honors level, will help you to do all of that analysis at once. So you also refer to structural equation modeling if you are going to be using structural equation modeling as to what will you be assessing and verifying with structural equation modeling. Structural equation modeling is more than that. There is also a testing the fit of a model. I cannot have time to actually talk about that. There are also other indices. There is quite a lot of validity checks when you are conducting structural equation modeling. I cannot have time to actually discuss all those validity checks. That will all be done in a single analysis. I cannot have enough time to actually talk about those validity checks that are incorporated in structural equation modeling. But as I've indicated, you will have to indicate how are you going to be using your structural equation modeling. If you want some sources that can actually highlight some few indices and what they mean in structural equation modeling, I can always forward them to you. Then when it comes to ethical considerations, I cannot add anything more than what Dr. Makasi indicated. Same thing with ethical considerations, delimitations, and so on and so on. So from there, I think, as I have indicated, the importance of research frameworks. They will give you, they are talking to you, whether you are going to use structural equation modeling or not, whether you are going to use the traditional SPSS analysis, the framework will always be there for you, will always be indicate to you as to what is it that you want to do here, or what is it that you are doing. As you can see here, these are the simple models. This simple job satisfaction work engagement model is too simple for honors, for even honors, if I can put it that way. This one over here with these three independent variables and one dependent variable, I think this is the framework that we have adopted for our honors level. but of course minus one independent variable. But I also believe that if a student can add any one independent variable, that is what we'll get, and that will also be acceptable. Research frameworks at intermediate level. For example, as you can see here, we've got the mediation effect, job satisfaction, mediating the effect or the impact of organizational support on work engagement. Intermediate B, we've got fairness, moderating the effect of job satisfaction on work engagement. To me, those two are too simple for masters. At least think of something like C over here, where you've got two independent variables, you've got one dependent variable, and you've got that mediation effect of fairness, mediating the effect of both loyalty on OCB and job satisfaction on OCB. Such a model at master's level will be sufficient and should come up with very interesting results. Almost like same thing over here, these D models, whereby we see quite a number of mediation effects over here. For example, all those arrows are representing the hypothesis, which means in that intermediate B framework, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hypotheses that could be sufficient at master's level. At E, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hypotheses, but you can always take it a step further and also investigate the mediation effects there. For example, in figure D, you can also investigate the mediating effect or role of job satisfaction on the effect of autonomy on work engagement. There is quite a lot of mediations that are happening in figure D. Same thing like in figure E. It is simple, only 4 variables. And how many hypotheses? 5 hypotheses, 5 linear hypotheses, if I can put it that way. But the mediation effects, job satisfaction mediating between organizational trust and withdrawal behavior. Also, withdrawal, okay, let me see the other one, job satisfaction mediating between organizational justice and withdrawal behavior. But you don't have to take it up there, but you can always take it up there by including the mediations. In that way, that will give your proposal that what we call oomph, if I can put it that way. At PhD level, you can have less than 4 hypotheses. Look at the moderations in that model over there. Look at also the mediations in that model over there. Look at the number of linear regression hypotheses, which are basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as well as 1, 2 mediations, job satisfaction mediating between org support and supervisory support to work engagement. Look at age, moderating between organizational support and work engagement. Look at collectivism, moderating those 2 parts over there. At PhD level, this really could be a very interesting study. With this number of variables, you will have to report what is it that you want to investigate there. Also, a more complex one, as we can see, but actually what I wanted to emphasize is the fact that such models are always telling you with regard to what are your objectives, what are your research questions, and what are your hypotheses, and what is it that you will have to analyze, and report at the end of the day. The importance of research frameworks. That is where I am stopping today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mthembu, for your presentation. And I'm now going to welcome questions from participants, which can now be directed to Dr. Makasi and also Dr. Mthembu. Please ask your questions. Mr. Gavasa.
Thank
Please
you, Chair.
proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Mkasa and Dr. Mthembu. Two questions. The first one, it's just general. It's about the research structure, the proposal structure. So my own understanding is if you are doing a quantitative research, there is research objective, then hypothesis, and the model. Then when you are doing qualitative research, there is research objective. Then instead of hypothesis, you write research questionnaires, and the model, yeah, if there is a model. But I've seen with different supervisors, they then request students to write aim of the research, which I then understand is supposed to be to go with qualitative research, but not with quantitative research. But I've seen a number of them then requesting that students they should write aim of research. Even if you write the primary research objective, you are also supposed to write the aim of the research. If you are doing quantitative, it's not mixed methodology, it's not qualitative. So I need clarity on the aim of research. Do we have to write the aim of research and write the research objective, or do we have to write the aim of research when you are doing quantitative research? That's the first question. Then the second question, I think I'll address it, I'll raise it later on after maybe you've addressed the first one. Or should I ask the second question?
Let's take it one question at a time. I've also recognized after you, Prof. Shia Murindi, and then after Prof. Shia Murindi, then we can have Ms. Kavi. Okay.
Excuse me. From where I stand, I usually, if the student is going to be presenting the objectives of the study, I usually don't expect the student to be presenting the aim together with the objectives, as we have just indicated. The aim, the primary objective, the secondary objectives, all that, to me, it tends to be a little bit of a repetition. From my side, of course, individual supervisors could require those, but from where I stand, I simply tell the student, you don't have to present the aim because you do have the primary research objective and the secondary research objective. And also, with regard to, I'm not actually contradicting Dr. Makasi here, but as I have indicated, I sometimes ask my students to actually derive those research questions, even though I think I've indicated that I am a quantitative person, to actually derive those research questions from the objectives and then present them as part of your problem statement. But of course, in some other instances or some other researchers may say you don't have to do this for this kind of a research. but that is my approach. That is the only thing that I think tends to differ in the way I do it with Dr. Makasi. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Dr. Montembu. Dr. Makasi, do you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think just adding a bit, but I think Dr. Mtembu has explained it. I think here we are looking at a research proposal outline, which is supposed to be flexible in terms of what the supervisor says. Prof, I'm talking to one of the students that I'm supervising, who, when you perhaps tell the student to say, this is the outline that I want you to follow, the student may tell you to say, I've got a student who's a colleague who's doing similar studies at Cape Town University, and they're using this particular framework or a particular outline. So I think maybe in that particular case, I would want to say it is important for students to listen to what the supervisors tell them to do. And finally, I also want to mention the fact that I don't think it is very important to worry about form. Rather, we should focus on substance. And I think for me, substance is very important in terms of the structure and also the flexibility that comes along the way. So I'm basically calling for flexibility as much as possible, particularly if you look at maybe some of those minor sections. I think Dr. Mtembu mentioned again to say, if we check at other universities, they would require students to mention the research questions first before the objectives. I'm sure you've seen it that way, okay? But we would perhaps recommend students to perhaps state their research objectives first, and then from the objectives, they can state their research questions. Thank you, Prof. That's what I wanted to mention. Thank you.
I totally. Thank you.
Sorry, Prof.
Dr. Makasi. Yes.
I totally agree with Dr. Makasi. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's fine. Also, please note, Mr. Gavasa, your aim is more like your primary objective. So it gives more or less same information. You have only one aim and you have only one primary objective. So your aim is basically your primary objective.
Thank you very much.
Oh, all right. Okay, we can move on. Prof. Shia Murindi.
Thank you, colleagues. Mine is to appreciate also the interventions provided by Dr. Makasi and Dr. Mtembu. I really think this shows us we need a longer session just dedicated to aspects of the quantitative aspects that they've explored. And there's a new phenomena I see among students is that students sit and look at you as the supervisor, expecting you to provide all the answers, where I appreciate students who go on a journey of discovery to say, I've read a paper by Mtembu published in this journal, and the analysis that was done was like this and that, and a critique, if you like, of what is in the field. We as supervisors, I must add, do not have all the answers to the many questions that are out there. But if you could also do also the work that you must do as a supervisor, it also helps us on the ground to be able to provide those answers basically to the questions that we may have. I wanted to also say to the students is let's also not shy away from the qualitative methods of doing research. I know students often come and say, I want the easiest way. And sometimes the easiest way is, according to some, is a survey, and I fill out the survey and people then give me these responses. The qualitative paradigm also provides means and mechanisms of trying to work through. And the institution has started also opening up resources where we can be trained in some of these things through the GMRDC offerings, and somebody is going to talk about that. So I really appreciate the combination in, we'll call it Makasi and Mtembu. And maybe there's a paper there, colleagues, that you too must write related to these issues, that you are edifying us, and sometimes for some students, they wish they had received some of these things a little bit earlier. It is a privilege for us to be given this information so soon in your master's or doctoral journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Chiamurindi. We're going to go to Ms. Kavi. Ms. Kavi, please proceed with your question.
Thank you, Prof. And thank you so much to Dr. Makasi and Dr. Mtembu. So my question is, like, I need us to just track back a bit to Dr. Makasi's presentation in terms of the research questions or the hypothesis formulation. So my question basically is that I've noted that when you are doing a qualitative study, it means that you need to come up with research questions. And if it's a quantitative study, it means that you need to formulate hypotheses. So in a case whereby you are now using the mixed methods, and remember, Dr. Makasi always reiterated that there should be alignment all throughout your proposal when you write your proposal. So I'm just a bit confused. I need clarity when it comes to mixed method, when you're using a mixed method. So are you going to have your research questions and also your hypothesis there in that section? And when it comes to also in terms of using the prefixes that are there, remember, when you are focusing on a qualitative study alone, you need to use those prefixes that way, being identified by Dr. Makasi, to say that you will say explore, observe, and they are different from that of quantitative. So I need clarity in that sense of the research questions and hypothesis in a mixed method, and how do you go about aligning it all throughout your proposal? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kavi. Okay, Dr. Makasi.
Prof,
then I can add.
Yeah, Prof. Yeah, I think it's a tricky one. Look, the issue of alignment is still very relevant in that assume I'm formulating my research objectives, and I've mentioned that the study is going to be mixed research methods. It means that in terms of the formulation of my research objectives, there must be a fair share of that, division between the qualitative research objectives and also quantitative research objectives. Okay. In other words, suppose my objective number one is about exploration, and then my objective number two is about examination or assessing. I would then assume that objective number one, which is exploration, takes care of the qualitative bit, and the examination takes care of the quantitative bit. Now, you may need now to then also follow it up to then say, in terms of objective one, which was basically a qualitative objective, I also accordingly would need a research question that speaks to it, okay? And then for those that are quantitative in nature, you also may need to then formulate appropriate research hypotheses in that particular manner. Now, in terms of mixing research methods approach, literature suggests that there are quite a number of designs, okay? In other words, for example, if it is explanatory sequential, is it exploratory sequential? It basically, or is it concurrent design that you're going to use in your mixed research methods? For example, if you start with quantitative research, for example, okay, as you're collecting the data, you collect the data, you analyze it quantitatively, and then perhaps you identify some gaps that are emerging from these results from quantitative research. Then you follow it up with a quantitative research, okay? In other ways, you are interested in exploring further, okay? So you can see that in terms of the design, you are starting with quantitative, following it up with qualitative. You can see that is different from starting with perhaps qualitative and then following it up with a quantitative research. So I think basically the issue of alignment does not really stop simply because we are using a mixed research methods. Objectives must speak to that to say there is a fair distribution of your objectives across the two approaches, meaning your qualitative objectives are there, the quantitative objectives are there. And then when it comes to the research questions or hypotheses, certainly there's no way you can formulate a research hypothesis for a qualitative objective. You need a question for that. So that's exactly what I'm thinking. And again, the alignment goes throughout, okay? Even when I'm looking at a design, it is still going to make sure that it's speaking to the two distributions that I'm talking about here. So that's basically how I would really encourage you to maybe go about it. So as a summary, let there be a fair distribution of the objectives, and also in terms of your research questions, they're addressing those qualitative objectives. The research hypothesis, they're addressing those quantitative research objectives, okay? And then you can move on like that in terms of collection. I would want you, I think, to read more about some mixed research methods, research designs. I'm just talking about the issue of exploratory sequential, explanatory sequential, your mixed research methods, or is it the convergent design? Think about these designs. I think you understand exactly how we can do it, because if it is a convergent design, for example, we are doing qualitative research on one side and quantitative research on the other side. We get the results from quantitative research, we get the results from qualitative research, and then we start comparing these two results. In other words, convergence takes place after data has been collected. So I think it is important for you perhaps to read more about these designs that are so relevant in mixed research methods. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Dr. Makasi.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Makasi. Mr. Gavaza.
Thank you, Chair. So my second question goes to Dr. Mthembu. I don't know, maybe I misquoted you when you were presenting the research instrument section. So you mentioned something, though today's seminar is about masters and PhD, but you mentioned something in particular about the honors students, that when it comes to honors students, in fact, you pinpointed that reliability is a must. They should include reliability. But when it comes to validity, it's like you downplayed it sort of, or you said maybe we shouldn't be sensitive when it comes to them writing reliability. So I wanted sort of a clarity or further explanation regarding them including the validity and reliability, because my understanding is if they don't then include reliability at an honors level, then that means the purpose of, we might lose the purpose of the study. We won't know if our research instrument is valid, etc. So I think it is important that at honors level, then we then introduce all these concepts so that when we then go to masters and PhDs, then we'll be in a better position to understand it. So so I wanted to understand whether do we have to downplay it, or what you meant is we are not supposed to be that sensitive when it comes to validity of the instrument when it comes to honors level.
Okay, I do hear your take. It's a very valid take, actually. Yeah, but as you have just indicated, I said that reliability is very important, even for honors. That is where they will have to report the validity of the instrument or the variable, if I can put it that way, at that level, at honors level. true what you are saying. The ideal situation will be where they are able to even report on the validity of the instrument. But oftentimes at that level, they are still struggling with even understanding validity, reliability. And that is when you indicate to them, look for the Cronbach alpha. And if it is less than this, that Cronbach alpha is compromised. If it is more than this, it's acceptable. If it is higher than this, it is very good. They are still at the basics of understanding that validity may not be very obvious the way it is presented in most of the studies. In most of the studies, it will just be statistics or indices that you as a knowledgeable scholar will have to know that if there is this level of these statistics or index, that means that this instrument is valid. Having to actually guide the students in that direction, the honor students in that direction, could be a very, could be asking for more from them. That is really, you could get them frustrated at that level. You could be asking for more from them at that level. But of course, when it comes to when they know everything about that now, reliability, etc., the items reporting this and that, then they definitely will have to be able to do that at master's level at least. But at honors level, I still have that take that reporting on the reliability should be sufficient. But the ideal situation is exactly like when you indicate. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Doc. The reason why I raised it is I've seen with colleagues that for us, some of us were privileged enough that we had to learn it at honors level, and when we went to masters, it was easy for us to then explain the difference between these two, reliability and validity. So to those who didn't learn it at early stages, it becomes something which is very challenging when they're doing it at masters. They have to start learning the difference and then write about it. So I think it is advisable that maybe at honors level, we should then introduce this concept, validity, reliability. If not at third year level, when they're doing that module, the research, the business research module, that's just the introduction, then maybe we go deep when it comes to matters. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very true what you are saying. But I do see a couple of my honor students here, like the Mpangalalas, like the Ngazonkes, they will tell you we do quite a lot of reliability together with validity at that level. But when it comes to the presentation of the proposals or the actual researches, we don't put much emphasis at that level. But when it comes to the theoretical part, the different forms of reliability, the different forms of validity, they get assessed on those because they need to know the difference between those as well as what they mean at that level, exactly like you indicate. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mthembu. Do we still have any question? I think we can also move on now because of time. We need to move on. I'm sure we've been able to look at most of the questions which you've asked. We're going to move on to the next item on our agenda. We are now going to just some of this item we've already talked about it, and maybe we will just summarize where necessary. Departmental, colloquial, SBE, FRHDC committees Prof. Yamurindi, if you can just maybe, because of time, if you can try to just summarize for us maybe five minutes, and then we can move on just because of time. And then I can also add where necessary, or colleagues can also add.
Thanks, Prof, and good afternoon to everyone. Yes, we are out of time, but I think the process is fairly simple. So basically what we try to encourage you to do is be working with your supervisor at the first level, having constant feedback between you and the supervisor. At a time when you and your supervisor then agree that you feel you're ready to present. Now, in some cases, in our department, we do allow students to present what we call a work in progress, where they do present and then get feedback, go and enact those changes, and still come back and present the final piece before it goes to the next committees. And then let's say you are now ready to present. You indicate, is this a work in progress, or is this a presentation that will be for the faculty? You then present, and the tips to presenting are simple. At that time, by the time you're ready to present, you should have some knowledge of your work, that you know very well. If we wake you up at 2 in the morning and say, what is your conceptual model like? What theories are you using and why are you using them? What is the contribution of your work, particularly for the PhD students? Because remember, on another day, we could have spoken about what constitutes a PhD contribution. Those are expectations that we know, and we expect you to be able to articulate. And remember, your articulations of that particular point has been in writing. Now you will have to come to a department where your departmental colleagues are there. We also encourage students who have not yet presented to also attend those sessions, so that they also can get some knowledge around tips on not just their projects as well, but to see how other students are faring. And then you arrive at the presentation. The presentation will usually be like this format that we have taken. There will be a chair of the meeting. The chair introduces everybody. You are given your 10 minutes or so to present. We then allocate responsibilities to the members of the department. Some will look at the title and the introduction. Some will look at the significance. Some will look at the literature review. Some will look at the referencing. So everything as will be evaluated at the faculty is then looked into. And then what you then do is you present. And when you present, some tips for presentations: don't be arrogant, don't be scared, don't look down on yourself to say, oh, I'm presenting to this panel of people who are professors. A little joke on the side. Somebody said to me, most of the professors I know don't know anything, but they are good in the fields that they are in. So that's exactly what there is. You are presenting to people who are going to give you feedback to improve your work. And then after your presentation, you then get feedback. We then make a decision, 5 possible outcomes. The first outcome is perfect. No changes at all. I've never seen that happen, and I'm glad that doesn't happen, because the biggest room in academia is this room for improvement, to always have your work. To this day, the irony, just today alone, I got feedback from an international journal. One accepted an article and the other one has rejected it. So it's part and parcel of the work that we are getting feedback to help us improve. And in both cases, with the acceptance and the rejection, there has been feedback that has been given. That's what I'm happy about, that I can make changes with that feedback. And then number 2, we make changes to the satisfaction of your supervisor, and we recommend that you go to the faculty to present. Number 3, we can also say, you don't have to come and present to us. Your proposal should be accompanied by a corrections report, which we will then look at in the next meeting to make a determination whether you are ready based on the changes made. Number 4, we then say, come back and present again based on the changes that have been given. Or number 5, rejected. In this case, you have time to go and rethink and re-strategize. And so the process then is the same at the faculty. The committee for the master's students is called the SBE or SHRDC, used to be called the SBE. You then present, there is a panel. Some of the members of the committee, they are here. I see Dr. Towns, Dr. Rungani, Dr. Ruzungunde is here. A very friendly place where you can also present your work, and people, Dr. Makasi is here, so that you are ascertained whether the work is conducive enough. And then for the master's, for the PhD students, that committee is called the FHRDC, the Faculty Higher Degrees Research Committee. Professor Chimcheka, myself, Professor Oni, Professor Elliott, Professor Filian, they are members of that committee, where you also get given a platform to present your work. And after you have presented, the same outcomes are expected. So you can be asked to represent at the faculty. If you've had an all clear, which is the 2, which is the best possible outcome, you then go to apply for your ethical clearance. So I'm glad of the process, because the process not only allows us to be able to read what you are working on as a student, but importantly, it also tells us, it also is an opportunity to get you to speak about your work, which is, I think, is also crucial. And maybe in a few years' time, you will hear that we are going to be changing even the examination process to a viva defense, which is something being adopted in overseas universities. I'm glad, at least at the foundational level, at department and faculty, we are allowing students that opportunity to present. Prof. Oni, I think that summarizes the presentation process.
Yeah, but thank you so much, Prof. Yamorindi, for a good summary of this process. We are going to move on to the next presentation, which is going to be by Dr. Ruzungude. Dr. Ruzu.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. I hope everyone can see my screen. Good afternoon, colleagues and everyone. I'm going to be quickly presenting on the ethical clearance process. And if we just take note from where the whole presentation started, there's been the issue of ethical clearance coming up here and there, because it's quite very important in this whole research process. So I'm just going to quickly go through the ethical clearance documents that we have when you're applying for your ethical clearance application. Why do we need to go through these documents? It's because we've noted also that there is a back and forth that happens with these documents. And I'm sure it has been highlighted earlier also, the issue of completing in record time. So once the proposal has been accepted and now you start your ethical clearance application process, if there is a back and forth, it also delays you, because you cannot progress to the next step without an ethical clearance certificate issued. Remember, we need to abide by all ethical considerations and make sure that everything is legit. So we really need to do this ethical clearance application with due diligence, making sure that everything is done as it should be. So I'm just going to quickly go through the application form with you, as is required by the GMRDC from the workshop that we had on the ethical clearance process. Let me just go through it and highlight some of the key areas that you'd find that people often ask on what is expected when they are completing the forms. So to begin with, the forms have changed. We have new forms that we are using. I'm sure they've been circulated across all departments. And when you're completing this with your supervisor, you just have to double check and make sure that you have the correct documents as of 2022 moving forth. So as was indicated earlier, your proposal needs to be approved, hence the first section here, which checks on whether the proposal has been approved. So if it's not approved, then it means you cannot progress, you cannot complete these ethical clearance forms unless your ethical, unless your proposal has been approved at the department level or at the SBE, FHRDC. And then the guidelines to complete for our faculty, section E, A, and D are compulsory. And then also the section B, which applies to human subjects, you'd find that section C and has the section that is most applicable when you're dealing with animals. It's for the science, faculty of science mostly. So on completing these forms, you need to make sure that you do not leave any blank spaces. If any section is not applicable to you, rather input not applicable. Do not leave any blank spaces. And when you're completing the name, full name of the degree, you need to make sure that it is as it appears on the registration form. You must put this in full. And on the issue of the funding of the research, according to the GMRDC, they say that you'd find that there is most confusion around students inputting the funding that they get for their degree purposes. This part is applicable where funding is concerned specifically for that project which you're doing. So if the bursary is for degree purposes, it means that information is not applicable here. You can tick the no option and not applicable because it's for degree purposes, whereas your degree also incorporates you doing a research. It's not funding specifically for this project. So you need to tick the no option here. And then under the supervisor details also, this is one area where you'd find that there are some mistakes that are usually made where it requires the school or institution of the supervisor. It refers to the affiliation of the supervisor, in this case, University of Fort Hare. It's not about where the supervisor obtained their degree, but it's about their affiliation. And then also, when we go further down, it's important to take note of the requirements of each section, as well as the number of words that are required, sorry, when completing that section. You'd find that here it says explain briefly in non-technical terms, which means as simple as you can be, in simple English, in simple language, which even if someone who is not from your field is to read that part, they can understand as simply as possible what it is that you need to do and the underlying basis of your research. So that is what is supposed to be in this place. It's not simply a matter of copying and pasting, but you have to try to put it in simple English for the person who's going to view it and go through your ethical clearance documents. And then also on the project description, I've highlighted some of the parts that usually people bypass. It's not about providing a full research proposal. As I've mentioned earlier, it's not a copy and paste thing, but you need to check what is required by each section. Here, they've made it easier. After the brief description that we have here, it goes on to put the different subheadings in numbers, which means you just have to simply follow what is required by each heading here and input what is required. Okay, and you find that you have also highlighted the issue of the number of words. It's always important to stick within the limit. And then we get to the proposed work plan. This is also another area where you find that there have been a number of issues here. Your proposed work plan, it needs to align with your progress and also the proper procedure, and you need to give full details of each chapter. I've given an example, if you can see my screen, that you need to state that chapter 1, which focuses on introduction and background, and then you put a date which you anticipate completion. And then when you talk about aligning, there's the issue of you cannot conduct a data collection without an ethical clearance. But you'd find that when some students submit their ethical clearance application, the date for a data collection is already, let's say right now, one is submitting for an ethical clearance. They'll put a date for March for data collection, which does not make sense. And it overrides the whole ethical considerations, because the reason why you're applying for an ethical clearance application is so that you can get a certificate that clears you to be able to go out into the field to seek further permission to conduct your study. So if you have a date which is before this application, it means you have done things unethically, which is a breach and is a punishable offense. So you must make sure everything aligns accordingly. Okay, and then we have the other sections here. You just tick appropriately, whichever is applicable to you. I just need to say something on this B2.1 here, because it was emphasized that when you're answering this section, you'd find that you need to, there are some scenarios where some students can tick the maybe or a non option. But as indicated by the GMRDC, if it does not contain your research interests, you have to tick no, because it's not applicable to you. So the maybe or a non option is not applicable. If it's not falling within your research interests, just tick the no option and stay away from the maybe or a non tick box. Okay. And we have this part here where it talks about the questionnaire. You have to make sure that you attach the copy of the research instruments that you'll be using. You also need to attach the informed consent. There's a checkbox at the end of this form, which will guide you on that. And the other section where you find a lot of forms being sent back is on B2.5, which requires one to specify the efforts that have been made or will be made to obtain informed permission. Here it is very important to always mention IFREC as the gatekeepers of the study, and then also mention that after permission has been obtained, it will further be sought from the organizations. Remember the whole process, it starts from IFREC, and then after the ethical clearance has been issued, you then go to seek permission from the organizations with that ethical clearance certificate. And also on the storage and the disposal of the research data here, I've given the example of some of the answers that you can use, because it's one section also that students can struggle with. How will the data research be secured and stored? You can use passwords, you can use lockable storages. When and how will the data be disposed of? It will be kept for a minimum of 5 years. You can also dispose by shredding. Those are just some examples to guide you on what is required on this section, and also on the dissemination of the findings. How will you provide feedback of your research to your research participants, and how will it be conducted in such a way as to protect the anonymity and confidentiality of participants? Examples here would be like sending thank you messages, providing feedback on request, telling the participants about your findings and recommendations, because usually you find that students struggle with how to respond in these sections, hence the guidelines on how one can address this section. Then you also find, okay, section C is not applicable in our faculty, so we'll skip it and we go to the last part, section D, which requires the applicant declaration and the signature. So you need to put the review date here when you're signing, and important to note is on the supervisor part, the signature is supposed to be real. They say they do not want one that is typed, as students can do this themselves. So this is for authenticity and to make sure that everything has been done properly. The supervisor has to input their real-time signature, and also to make sure the review date. And there is a checklist that needs to be checked here on the part of the student. You need to make sure that everything has been attached. You need to attach the proposal that has been approved together with your ethical clearance application. You need to attach your questionnaire. You need to attach your informed consent. Any other information that is relevant to your application, you need to attach on this form. And there is something that Prof. Chinyamuringi mentioned earlier in terms of the timeline for the ethical clearance. You'd find that when your ethical clearance certificate is issued, it's valid for a year. And you have to make sure that you try by all means to do your data collection within that time frame. So what happens in the event that one fails to meet this timeline due to reasons that are unknown or unforeseen? You'd find that you can apply for an extension before the certificate expires, because sometimes you can know that you will not be able to meet the deadline. So in such a scenario, you can apply for an extension, stating the reasons why you would like for an extension. Alternatively, you can also apply for a renewal if your ethical clearance has expired, stating the reasons that can justify you being granted that ethical clearance certificate as being renewed. you can state reasons now that can warrant an extension or a renewal. So this is basically the whole ethical clearance application process, and these are the forms that we normally use. There are also forms that can be used for secondary data collection, but there's not much difference from this in terms of the areas that usually confuse individuals when completing. So I think this will be all on ethical clearance documents. I'm not sure if there are any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Ruzungunde. Do we have any question from participants? No questions, Dr. Ruzu. I think you can now move to the GMRDC workshops. Dr. Ruzu, can you please increase the font size a bit for?
Is this fine?
It's fine. Thank you. Yes.
All right, thank you so much. And I didn't realize I was on mute. I was talking to myself. Okay, so I was saying that with the workshops, there's not much to be said, but this is just to encourage the postgrad students to register and to attend the workshops that are offered by the GMRDC, as this will go a long way in the research process for all our postgrad students. This is an ongoing process. I'm sure it has been echoed over and over again with the previous presenters. So we are very fortunate enough that there are workshops that are in place. And here is just a guideline of the workshops that are available. You can find it in the daily bulletin, and the forms to register are there. Most of them, they require you to register 5 days before, as you can see at the end. So we are all just encouraged to register for this. Right now, there's actually an ongoing workshop in at Mpekweni, and apparently only 5 postgrads turned out, which is quite disappointing because we have lots of postgrad students, and this information would help a long way. The issue of quantitative and mixed method, I'm sure it's one of the workshops that is going on right now. So we need to make use of these platforms as they can assist us greatly. So please, our postgrad students, please register for these workshops and make use of the availability of such platforms. That's all I can say when it comes to these workshops. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ruzungude. Mr. Gavasa, you wanted to ask a question. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. So, Dr. Ruzungunde, our issue as postgrad with this workshop is the issue of non-response. I'm sure 2 or 3, some of my colleagues here, they can support that we have been applying for this workshop, and there's a totally non-response which is coming from GMRDC. And now it's a matter of postgrad that we are getting frustrated that you send an email, you apply, there's no response at all, even to say, you are rejected to attend this workshop. So that's, I think that's why most of the postgrads are no longer applying, because we are not getting response from GMRDC when we apply.
Okay, thank you for that. I think I can hand this over to our HODs. Maybe they can address this issue better, because it turns out that from that workshop, they are saying 14 people RSVP'd, but only 5 turned out. So I think I can hand this over to Prof. Oni and Prof. Tinyamurindi.
Thank you, Dr. Ruzungunde. I'm just hearing this for the first time. I wasn't aware, like our students do communicate with GMRDC and do not get feedback. So we're going to communicate with the GMRDC office and try to find out, what was the problem and how our students can be assisted in future. Prof. Shia Murindi, may you kindly add?
Yeah, I think that's the best thing, Prof. Let's escalate it and say, why, find out why there's no response. That would be our only best option, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let us now move on. Dr. Rungani, are you still with us? I'm not sure.
Yes, I am.
Oh, thanks a lot for waiting so long. Dr. Rungani, please proceed with your presentation.
Okay. Just give me. Can you see my projection?
Yes, we can see it, Dr. Rungani.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ellen. I will be looking at final submission requirements and target dates for our work as a master's, PhD students, or honors students. Yes. All right. So you can see that we have had presentation from different presenters. Some have talked about the proposal. Some have talked about, how we write our work. And now we are looking at, when you are almost, finishing your final document, when you are, finalizing, your research. It can be your thesis. If you're a PhD, it can be a dissertation, or it can be a research report or research project if you're an honors student. Now, it is important that you have targets in terms of the deadlines, so that you make sure that you finish your work within the stipulated time. I think Prof. Oni, in his presentation, he was able to inform us, the minimum requirements, the times that you are expected to finish your work. So it's imperative that when you are, busy with your work, for you to be focused, you've got deadlines that help you, to make sure that, you have direction in terms of how you are, finalizing your work. It's also good that when you see that you are about to finish your studies, you have an intention to submit, that you communicate, with your supervisor. That way it assists, us for internal processes, because when you are about to finish, we need to appoint external examiners so that your work is examined by those examiners. And it's difficult for us sometimes to appoint an external examiner when we are not sure how long you are in terms of finishing. Most universities, they have a formal structure of intention to submit, but here at Fort Hare, we don't have a formal structure or a formal process where we do the intention to submit, but it's something that we normally encourage students to do it with their supervisors, to see if you see that you are intended to submit your work for examination, you at least inform your supervisor 6 months, at least 6 months before, so that the internal processes can start the issue of appointing external examiners. And when you look at submission deadlines in terms of the structures of the university, you will see that there are prescribed dates that are provided as per the general rules of the university. For example, when you look at the general prospectus of the University of Fort Hare, we normally use the rule G 18.6.7, which is a general rule that tries to guide you in terms of the dates where you need to submit your thesis or dissertation or research report for examination. So when you look at master's and doctoral thesis and dissertations, your rule that guides you is the rule 18.6.71. which talks about, the thesis which should be submitted on or before 20th of February for the subsequent June graduation. It can be May graduation. It depends, the time of graduation. I was using the 2021 general prospectus, but you can see that, because of COVID, we had pushed our graduation to June, but sometimes it can be May. So whichever the case, whether it's June or May, the 28th of February is the due date, or else, let's say you miss that deadline, which is your winter graduation. There is an alternative, which is the 17th of July for your summer or the summer graduation, which normally happens in October. Sometimes we push it further, depending with the situation that is at hand. So that is the deadline for your submission in terms of master's and doctoral theses. And then if you are doing an honors project or research report, you need to submit before the 15th of January, for winter graduation. I'm just going to say winter graduation because it can be June or May, depending with the situation or what Senate has approved. For example, this year Senate has approved May. Alternatively, you can also submit by the 17th of July for the summer graduation. But colleagues, the deadlines that you are talking about, the submissions that you are referring to, is when you are submitting the whole document that has already been marked. We normally have situations where students, they just submit the combined document that has never been seen by the supervisor, around these deadlines, and then you expect that is your final document. When we talk about submission deadlines, we are talking about an approved draft that you have already been given to giving your supervisor. So when you are submitting, you need to give a first draft, the supervisor marks it before these deadlines. Second draft, again, it's marked. If you are lucky, you don't go to the third draft, but normally we go to the third draft. Maybe that's your final draft. Then when your supervisor then says, okay, can you prepare your document for submission? Those are the deadlines that we're talking about. We have instances where we have students, when they see that they are approaching the deadline, they just combine the document and then they give you on the dot. Let's just say, give me your document maybe on the 15th of January. Let's say you're an honor student, but this is my first time to see that draft. I can't send that draft to the external examiner. So you haven't met the deadline for submission because it's still internal. We are not sending it out. So it's very important that when you're looking at these deadlines, we are talking about final submission for examination, not submission for you for internal processes. No. So it's important for us to take note of that. Okay, I want to go to the last slide. Know what's going on. Let's say next. All right. And then this was one question I had to add this because this was one question that was asked by some. So the general prospectus, after looking at the deadlines and submission dates, it also then provides guidelines to those who have submitted on time in Rule 18 G 18.6.73 that talks about any honors or masters or doctoral who complies with the submission deadlines. That let's say that you have met the deadline, and the rules then says you shall not be liable for the payment of registration fees for the year in case there is any delay in the process of examination of the dissertation or your thesis. So when you submit on time for examination, not for marking of your supervisor, for examination, if there are any delays within the examination of your thesis or your dissertation or research report, the rules cover you. You are not, it will be waived, that amount. But if you submit on time.
Hello, Baba. Ukhuluma noPhumlani. Yes, Baba.
If you submit on time, but it's not for external examining, it means it's still an internal process.
So,
you need to mute that colleague.
May you kindly mute your mic, Phumlani, please mute.
Thank you. And then any candidate who submits the dissertation or the thesis or project after this deadline shall be liable for the prescribed fees in order to register for the subsequent academic year. So it's very important that we abide by these deadlines. And it's very important, as I have said, to communicate with your supervisor, because remember, you submit your work to be marked, but your supervisors are not only waiting for your work. You are not the only student. And sometimes you submit during examination time periods where they are marking scripts, and they have to prioritize the marking of scripts first. So it's important when you are planning, your intention to submit, for you to make sure that you submit your work, your final documents within a specific time, so that your supervisor have got time to look at your document, and you've got also time to come back. Sometimes students just want to submit in December, maybe the last date that this is my last draft, and it's not a good time, because the supervisor sometimes is not available to look at your work. So it's always good that you communicate, with your supervisors, because it's a two-way relationship, so that you find time when you are supposed to submit your final document for internal marking, so that by the time, so it's better to have internal deadlines. In our departments, we normally have internal deadlines prior to the university deadlines, so that by the time we reach the university deadlines, we are already done and your work is already ready for submission. That's all I have to say, and I'll open up for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rungani, for your presentation. And I'm now going to allow participants to ask questions. Do we have questions for Dr. Rungani?
Okay.
Dr. Rungani, it seems
silence is not consent in the context.
The participants are tired. Maybe.
Sometimes it's confusion, but that's the rules
it
anyway.
means it's perfect.
They can still refer them to the general prospectus for guidance. But yes, yeah, that's all. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Rungani. So we are now going to close our session, and I would like to thank you for taking your time to come, and we can see this orientation program is very useful, and it provides very important information which will guide you with your journey as you try to complete your master's and PhD degrees. And I would also now like to allow also Prof. Shiyamurindi to also add, and then we can now close our session. Thank you for coming. Prof. Shiyamurindi.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I don't know if that's Bramwell's old hand or.
Oh, Bramwell.
You might have a question.
Oh, Mr. Gavasa. Bramwell, you've got a question.
Thank you, Prof. It's not a question. I just want to thank everyone for organizing this event, and I want to thank the department as well and everyone who have joined. We really benefited from this. I hope we have more of these events coming, especially for our department. And I also had a suggestion. I don't know if, but I understand that people are busy, but I don't know if it's going to work. I've seen one of the universities, what they do is they do have these events after a month or after 2 months, whereby they just come together, and there will be one person who will be facilitating from the department, be it you, Prof, or another colleague who will be facilitating discussions, and postgrad would then discuss about their progress for that specific period, and peers will then chip in and give feedback and how best they can address the challenges which they are facing. So I would like to suggest or to ask if the department can then create such a platform for us postgrads so that we can be able to interact with each other and have that platform to discuss our research and progress and the challenges which we face as postgrad. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gavasa. We will consider it as we move forward and for your suggestion. Prof. Chiamorindi.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Prof. And thank you, colleagues, for attending this session. And I actually echo the same sentiments as Mr. Gawaza to also say we need more of this. And I think Dr. Towns has written a comment where she's asking colleagues to also indicate what topics they would like to see. And even a monthly session where we have a working group of this nature where people can also share their experiences of what they're going through in terms of their research, it will be greatly appreciated. But I also want to also thank the hard work that has been put by Dr. Towns in allowing us the opportunity to be here. It's wonderful that we are here in trying to help each other build the students and also the staff members that are here. So thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you to all the facilitators and presenters for taking time to prepare for their sessions. We really value this, and we hope that all the input that have been found, including the recordings, will be made available and the presentation so that people can have a base to work from. Thank you very much, and back to you, Prof.
All right, colleagues, we've come to the end of our presentation, and we look forward to more, presentations and meetings where we can engage one another as we, navigate this journey of you completing your master's and PhD degrees. So for today, we are finished. We will keep in touch and have a blessed day. Thank you.
Thank you.